My name is Adela Stephen, and I am 28 years old. At Sunday dinner last week, my sister introduced her new boyfriend. He was a corporate climber in a tailored blazer, eager to impress my family. When he turned his practiced smile to me and asked what I did for a living, my mother cut me off before I could draw breath. She told him I was between jobs. She told him not to ask because it was a sensitive subject. My sister patted his arm and warned him that my situation was kind of sad. I sat there in my gray sweater, holding a silver fork, and let them paint me as the unemployed family embarrassment. I didn't defend myself. I didn't tell them the truth. What none of them knew, not my mother, not my sister, and certainly not the boyfriend, was that 3 days earlier I had reviewed his personnel file. He was a mid-level manager at OmniHealth, and I am the new chief technology officer of his entire corporation. When he finally asked for my full name to connect professionally, offering to help me find a job in the mailroom, the look of sheer terror that erased his polite smile was something my family will never forget. Welcome back to Morning Revenge, where quiet women finally stop funding their own erasure. If your family ever mistook your silence for weakness, tell me your age and your story down in the comments, and be sure to subscribe. Stories like mine prove that the truth doesn't need to shout to tear a house down. Let me take you back to the dining room in Edina. The room smelled of roasted rosemary and the suffocating pressure of unstated expectations. My mother, Susan, sets a table like she is staging a hostage negotiation. Crystal water glasses catch the light. Heavy mahogany gleams under the chandelier. The good linen napkins are folded into rigid peaks. I sat near the edge of the table, methodically slicing my chicken, letting the heavy silver cutlery absorb the tension. Across from me sat Liam, my sister Victoria's latest project. He wore a navy blazer with a crisp collar, broadcasting his ambition with every calculated gesture. He had the firm handshake and sustained eye contact of a man desperate to prove he belonged in the local high society ecosystem. Victoria sat next to him, glowing with validation. She curated her life the way a museum curates an exhibit, constantly managing the lighting and the angles. Liam leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He deployed a warm, neighborly smile in my direction. "So, Adela Victoria tells me you are living downtown. What is it you do?" I inhaled to answer. I was going to tell him I worked in medical technology. It was true, simple and safe. But my mother neatly inserted herself into the fraction of a second before my vocal cords engaged. "Adela is between jobs at the moment," my mother said. Her tone was bright and frictionless. It carried the unmistakable cadence of Minnesota nice. That is a regional specialty where cruelty is routinely wrapped in Midwestern pity and served alongside the side dishes. "We do not press her on it," Susan continued. "She is taking some time to figure things out." A soft collective chuckle rippled around the table. It was the sound of my family reaching their comfortable consensus. I looked down at my simple slate gray cashmere sweater. To my mother and sister, the absence of a stiff lapel and a daily commute signaled failure. They interpreted my quiet, homebound routine as a lack of direction. They were unaware that my casual attire was the standard uniform of the remote tech elite. The sweater cost more than my sister's car payment, but to them, it was just the wardrobe of someone giving up. "Maybe do not mention the job thing at the country club this weekend, Liam," Victoria added. She rested a perfectly manicured hand over his wrist. "It is a sensitive topic. We just want her to be happy." Liam nodded sympathetically. His expression shifted into a mask of polite concern. "Of course. The market is tough right now. If you need any pointers on your resume, Adela, let me know. I do a lot of hiring over at OmniHealth." The name of the company hung in the air over the roasted potatoes. OmniHealth, a global medical technology conglomerate headquartered right here in the Twin Cities. I placed my knife down on the edge of my plate. The porcelain clinked under the weight of the silver. I looked at Liam, really looked at him. I tracked the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead, the eager tilt of his chin. He was a data integration manager. I knew this because I had spent Thursday morning reviewing the bloated organizational charts of my new company, circling redundant middle management positions in red ink. I did not argue with him. I did not lean across the table and defend my credentials. I did not point out that the man offering to review my resume required my explicit authorization to approve his own departmental budget. I merely smiled, took a slow sip of my sparkling water, and swallowed the narrative they had constructed for me. You might wonder why I did not correct them right then and there. Why I let my own mother erase a decade of my relentless work. In my family, the truth is considered an act of aggression. My mother runs our family the way a public relations firm runs a scandal. If I had spoken up, if I had announced my title, she would not have been proud. She would have been terrified. It would have ruined Victoria's moment. It would have made the evening uncomfortable. And making things uncomfortable is the one unforgivable sin in her house. So I sat there and played my assigned role, the silent, struggling sister, the cautionary tale. Liam cut into his chicken, emboldened by my silence. He started talking about the corporate restructuring at work. The executives are bringing in some heavy hitters, he told my father. We just got a new chief technology officer. Nobody has seen her yet. She operates out of the shadows, but word is she is an unrelenting shark. They say she is going to clean house. Victoria gazed at him with wide, admiring eyes. I bet you will impress her, Liam. You practically run your division anyway. My mother passed the gravy boat to Liam, beaming. It is so nice to see young people with such drive. Adela, maybe you could take some notes from Liam's work ethic. It is all about putting yourself out there. I took the gravy boat from Liam when he offered it. Our fingers brushed. His hands were soft. The hands of a man who wrote emails about work instead of actually doing it. I poured a small amount over my plate. I will definitely keep that in mind, I said. My voice was level. A flat, calm surface hiding a severe drop. The dinner stretched on. Liam kept talking about his strategies, his big plans to secure a director-level promotion by the end of the quarter. Every word he spoke was another brick in the wall he was building between himself and his own survival. And my mother and sister kept handing him the mortar, praising his ambition, while looking at me with variations of gentle disgust. I chewed my food and listened to the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I felt a cold, deep clarity settle into my bones. My family had spent years forcing me into a box so they could stand on top of it. They weaponized polite concern to keep me small. They assumed I would just absorb the humiliation forever because I had never fought back before. But I was done being the silent bank. I was done being the family secret. As dessert plates were brought out and Liam offered to connect with me on professional networking sites just to give my profile a boost, I realized the trap was already set. They had built it themselves. I just had to decide exactly when to let it snap shut. Monday morning arrived with the sharp winter light of the Twin Cities slicing through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown loft. The space was silent except for the low hum of the espresso machine and the faint traffic moving along the river below. I sat on my sofa with my legs crossed, holding a tablet. I was wearing the exact same oversized slate gray cashmere hoodie my mother had sighed at the night before. The fabric was spun in Scotland, unbranded and impossibly soft. To my family in the suburbs, clothing without a rigid collar or a visible logo meant you had given up. They demanded the aesthetic of suffering. They wanted the commute, the stiff blazer, the visible stress of middle management. They were oblivious to the fact that this casual, unmarked clothing was the uniform of the remote tech elite. I unlocked my tablet. The screen illuminated my face with the cold light of a secure corporate portal. While my family assumed I spent my days browsing job boards and feeling sorry for myself, I was currently logged into the executive network of OmniHealth. I was reviewing the Phase 3 restructuring roadmap for our global artificial intelligence integration. It was an $80 million acquisition and overhaul. I scrolled to the organizational charts for the data integration sector. This was the exact division Liam had boasted about at the dinner table. I traced the lines of hierarchy with my index finger. The department was bloated. It was choked with redundant positions created by legacy executives who valued meetings over mechanics. People who talked about synergy instead of writing code. People exactly like Liam. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at the notification. It was not a work alert. It was a social media update from Victoria. I tapped the screen, and her curated feed filled my view. Victoria had posted a photo of herself sitting at a sleek cafe table. She was wearing a tailored blazer, holding a branded paper cup with both hands. Her laptop was open to a generic spreadsheet, angled perfectly for the camera. The caption read, "Monday grind, chasing those corporate goals and making moves." It was accompanied by a string of inspirational emojis. I stared at the image. Victoria was a junior marketing coordinator. Her job consisted of organizing catering for client pitches and updating social media calendars. Yet she broadcasted a relentless girl boss persona to her thousands of followers. Her entire identity was built on the performance of success. She curated the lighting, the angles, the narrative. I looked back at my tablet. I was deciding the fate of an entire division. I held the leverage. I possessed the actual power. Yet I sat in silence. A bitter taste settled in the back of my throat. I set my coffee down. The truth was, I could not blame my family for treating me like a failure. I had actively participated in my own erasure. I had handed them the brush and let them paint me into the corner. The memory surfaced uninvited and sharp. I was 23 years old. I had just won a premier national award for algorithmic predictive modeling. It came with a heavy lead crystal trophy and a substantial grant. I drove straight to my parents' house in Edina, carrying the glass award in both hands. I walked into the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs, eager for the one thing I could never seem to earn. My mother was standing by the island, arranging a centerpiece. Victoria was sitting on a stool, showing off a flimsy paper certificate she had received for completing a 2-day corporate seminar on public relations. Susan was practically glowing. She touched Victoria's shoulder. "This is going to look so impressive on your resume, sweetheart. You are such a natural networker." I stepped forward and placed my crystal trophy on the granite counter. The glass caught the overhead light. I told them what it was. I explained the algorithm. I explained the grant. Susan stopped arranging the flowers. She looked at the heavy crystal trophy the way a person looks at a complicated household appliance they do not want to read the manual for. "That is nice, Adela," she said. Her voice was flat and administrative. She picked up the trophy, walked over to the hallway closet, and placed it on a high shelf behind a stack of winter blankets. "It is just an antisocial hobby, though. You spend too much time staring at screens in the dark. You should take a page from your sister. Try to smile more. Try to connect with people in the real world." She closed the closet door. The click of the latch echoed in the quiet kitchen. I had filed that memory away for years. I had told myself my silence was a virtue. I convinced myself that not bragging about my career was a sign of humility. I thought I was taking the high road. Sitting here on my sofa, staring at Liam's departmental chart, I finally understood the flaw in my logic. Invisibility is not a neutral act. It is a vacancy. And when you leave your own narrative vacant, people like my mother and my sister will move in and furnish it with their own lies. I had sandblasted my own edges smooth, just so I would not scratch my family's pristine social surface. I returned my attention to the OmniHealth restructuring document. The sentimentality burned away, replaced by the cold comfort of mathematics. Numbers do not care about social media aesthetics or Midwestern politeness. If an equation does not balance, it demands a correction. I pulled up the audit protocol for the middle management tier. I authorized a zero-tolerance efficiency review for the data integration sector. Every manager in that division, including Liam, would now have to justify their daily output against their salary to an automated system. No more hiding behind jargon, no more coasting on firm handshakes and tailored blazers. The metrics would be objective. I tapped the screen. The authorization went through. The immediate work crisis was resolved. My professional domain was clean, ordered, and functioning exactly as designed. I locked the tablet and placed it on the glass table. I let out a long breath, feeling the tension drain from my shoulders. The silence of the loft felt like a sanctuary again. Then my phone lit up. The screen displayed a new text message, not a social media notification this time, a direct message from Victoria. I picked up the device. "Hey," Victoria wrote, "I need a tiny favor." I watched the typing bubble appear and disappear. She was crafting her pitch. A moment later, a block of text arrived. "Liam's parents are flying in next month. They are super traditional and expect things to be done a certain way. I am planning a pre-engagement party to introduce everyone. I really need it to be perfect. The thing is, the venue I want requires a hefty deposit up front. I need a small loan to cover the catering and the space. You live so quietly downtown, and you do not really have any overhead. It would mean a lot to me." I read the words 3 times. The audacity was breathtaking. My sister, who had just spent an entire evening participating in my public humiliation, was now asking me to fund the very lifestyle she used to make me feel inferior. She viewed my lack of ostentatious spending not as financial prudence, but as a pool of dormant capital waiting for her to dip her hands into. The text message glowed against the dark background of my screen. The request was not just a favor, it was an extraction. It was the natural byproduct of the fictional dynamic we had maintained for years. They required me to be the invisible, unemployed disappointment in public, but they demanded I act as their silent, reliable bank account in private. I sat alone in my expensive loft, holding the device. The transition was seamless. I had just finished restructuring a global corporation, and now I was being summoned to finance a party meant to impress the very man whose career I had just placed on the chopping block. The professional audit was handled, but the family ledger remained disastrously out of balance, and my sister was standing at the register waiting for me to hand over the cash. The text message from Victoria sat on my screen like an unpaid invoice. I was still looking at the block of text when the phone vibrated against my palm. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. Susan did not text when money was involved. She understood that text messages left a paper trail, a permanent record of who needed whom. Phone calls evaporated into the air, leaving only the compliance behind. I swiped to answer and brought the device to my ear. "Good morning, Adela," Susan said. Her voice carried the flat, administrative brightness of a dental receptionist confirming an expensive procedure. There was no warmth, only a frictionless forward momentum. "I assume your sister reached out to you." "She sent a text," I said. "Good, then you know the situation." Susan did not pause to ask how I was doing. She did not ask if I had eaten breakfast or if my fictitious job hunt was going well. She moved straight to the ledger. "Liam's parents are flying in from Boston next month. They belong to a very different social strata, Adela, traditional money. Victoria needs to secure the conservatory at the Botanical Gardens for the welcome dinner, and the venue requires the deposit up front." "And she expects me to pay for it?" I said, keeping my tone level. "She expects you to be a supportive sister," Susan corrected smoothly. "It is $15,000. We both know you do not have any real overhead living down there in that empty apartment. You do not buy professional clothes. You do not commute. You are taking time to figure yourself out, and we support that. But Victoria is building a future. She needs a small bridge loan to make the right impression." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the icy Mississippi River. A small bridge loan. My mother weaponized my quiet lifestyle, using the very simplicity she mocked to justify her financial demands. They erased my identity at the dinner table, introducing me as the jobless embarrassment. But behind closed doors, they treated me like an automated teller machine. "She works in marketing, Mom. Why does she not have her own savings?" Susan sighed. It was a practiced, heavy sound, designed to make me feel unreasonable. "Victoria works in a highly visible industry. She has to maintain appearances." Wardrobe networking events, leasing a car that fits her brand, those things cost money. You do not have those pressures. You get to sit at home in your sweats. It is the least you can do to help her cross the finish line with Liam. The irony tightened my chest. The man Victoria was trying to impress was a middle manager whose entire department I had just flagged for a zero-tolerance efficiency audit. I could end his corporate trajectory with a single keystroke, yet I was being instructed to finance the string quartet for his welcome party. "I will send the transfer," I said. "Thank you, sweetheart," Susan replied. Her voice instantly returned to its default Minnesota nice setting. The transaction was complete. "We will see you Sunday for dinner. Wear something nice, please." She disconnected the line before I could respond. I walked back to the sofa and picked up my tablet. I opened my secure banking application. The biometric scanner flashed, authenticating my identity, and my primary checking account loaded. The balance displayed a number that would have made Liam choke on his expensive scotch. $15,000 was a fraction of my standard quarterly performance bonus. It was a statistical rounding error in my personal wealth. I navigated to the transfer screen and selected Victoria's account from my saved recipients. I typed in the amount, 15000. My finger hovered over the glowing blue confirmation button. The screen cast a cold, sterile light across my face in the dim morning shadows of the loft. I felt the familiar hollow ache of self-betrayal. Every time I did this, I rationalized the payment as the cost of a quiet life. I told myself that funding their illusions was easier than fighting their reality. I bought their silence with wire transfers. I pressed send. A green checkmark appeared. The immediate pressure from my mother was resolved. Victoria would secure the botanical gardens, Liam's parents would be sufficiently dazzled, and I would be allowed to return to my peaceful, isolated existence. But as the confirmation email chimed in my inbox, the lingering grossness of the exchange settled over my skin. I felt dirty. I felt used. To cleanse my mind, I did the only thing that ever truly grounded me. I turned to mathematics. I moved to my home office alcove, sitting down at my multi-monitor workstation. The mechanical keyboard clacked rhythmically under my fingertips as I opened my financial tracking software. I needed the rigid, unemotional logic of columns and rows to wash away the cloying manipulation of my mother's voice. I began reconciling my personal portfolios. I moved through the checking accounts, the high-yield savings, the diversified stock portfolios, and the algorithmic crypto investments I had built in college. Everything balanced flawlessly. Then I clicked over to the family trust. My grandfather, a pragmatic man who built a chain of regional hardware stores from scratch, had bypassed his own daughter to name me the sole trustee of his estate when I was just 22 years old. He had watched me dissect a corporate tax return over a holiday dinner and recognized a kindred spirit. He knew Susan cared only for optics, and he knew Victoria cared only for status. He trusted me with the ledger because numbers were the only things I respected. The trust was designed to disperse modest, fixed quarterly dividends to Susan and Victoria, while the principal remained locked in low-risk municipal bonds. The maintenance fees were predictable. The tax burdens were automated. It was a sleepy, uninteresting account that required my attention perhaps twice a year. I downloaded the latest ledger and ran a standard reconciliation script I had written to flag anomalies. The progress bar blinked across the screen, a soothing rhythm of data parsing. 3 seconds later, the screen flashed red. My posture straightened. I leaned closer to the monitor. The script had caught a discrepancy. I manually pulled up the itemized statements for the past 18 months, my eyes scanning the dense rows of transactions. It was not a bank error. It was not a misplaced maintenance fee. It was an ongoing, unapproved draw. Starting roughly a year ago, money had begun bleeding out of the trust's secondary liquid reserve. Small amounts at first, $2,000 here, $3,000 there, labeled under generic, ambiguous terms like administrative estate expenditure or legal consulting retainer. I pulled the routing numbers attached to the outward transfers. The digital trail did not lead to a law firm or an accounting agency. The funds were being routed into a holding account managed by a third-party digital bank. My chest grew tight. The air in the loft suddenly felt thin. I cross-referenced the dates of the withdrawals with Victoria's social media timeline. The first $2,000 draw perfectly coincided with a trip she took to Tulum, framed on her feed as a brand-sponsored retreat. A $5,000 transfer aligned exactly with the week she moved into her overpriced luxury apartment in the North Loop. The tension inside me shifted sharply from the passive, suffocating suppression I had endured for years into something severe and cold. This was not my mother guilt-tripping me into a bridge loan. This was not a plea for a sisterly favor. Someone had bypassed the security protocols of the trust. Someone was actively siphoning funds from the principal reserve. The family was not just relying on my bank account to fund their fictional lives while erasing my identity. They were committing active, documented financial theft. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. The narrative of the poor, jobless sister was nothing more than a convenient smokescreen. I had found the bleeding edge of the lie. The era of the silent bank was officially over, and the opening bell for a very different kind of warfare had just rung. The security intercom buzzed. The harsh electronic tone shattered the sterile quiet of my home office. I glanced away from the red error message flashing on my monitor. The ledger of the family trust remained open, detailing the systematic theft of my grandfather's money. I tapped a key to minimize the financial tracking software, hiding the evidence behind a generic landscape screensaver. I walked to the entry console and pressed the video feed button. Victoria stood in the lobby of my building. She was holding 2 large iced coffees in branded cardboard carriers, shifting her weight impatiently in expensive leather boots. She had not called ahead. I pressed the release button and unlocked the front door. By the time the elevator chimed on my floor, I had smoothed my features into a mask of placid indifference. Victoria stepped into my loft, bringing the scent of heavy perfume and roasted espresso into the space. She looked around the minimalist interior, her eyes briefly scanning the sparse high-end furniture before landing on me. "I brought peace offerings," she announced, lifting the drink carrier. I wanted to say, "Thank you for the transfer this morning. It really saved the day with Liam's parents." I accepted the cold plastic cup. My gaze drifted to her outfit. Victoria was draped in a structured, pristine ivory blazer. The tailoring was immaculate. The fabric, a heavy wool blend that spoke of exclusive boutiques. I recognized the designer label stitched near the cuff. The garment retailed for an amount roughly equivalent to 2 months of rent for a standard apartment. I knew exactly how she had acquired it. The fabric on her shoulders was quite literally woven from the $15,000 I had wired her 3 hours ago. She was wearing my money, standing in my home, pretending to do me a favor. Victoria set her iced coffee on the granite kitchen island and unzipped her oversized tote bag. "I wanted to help you out," she said, pulling a sleek silver laptop from the bag. "You helped me, so I am returning the favor. We need to get you back on your feet, Adela." She opened her laptop and spun the screen to face me. I walked over and looked at the display. It was an old, severely outdated draft of my resume I had emailed her 5 years ago when I was applying for a low-level coding internship. "I have been looking at this," Victoria continued, tapping a manicured fingernail against the screen. "And I have to be honest, it is a disaster. No wonder you are having trouble finding a position. You do not know how to market yourself." I took a sip of my iced coffee. The bitter liquid washed over my tongue. I watched my sister execute a flawless performance of corporate cosplay. Her entire existence was built on the aesthetic of success. She believed that wearing an ivory blazer and using the word market transformed her into an executive. She had zero comprehension of the actual mechanics of power. "Let me show you what I mean," Victoria said. She highlighted a bullet point under my previous experience section. The text read, "Lead Systems Architecture and Algorithmic Deployment." She pressed the delete key. The words vanished. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Victoria sighed, adopting the patient tone of a teacher correcting a slow student. "Systems architecture sounds terrible, Adela. It is too masculine. It sounds intimidating, like you are going to be difficult to manage. Corporate recruiters do not want difficult. They want team players. They want a culture fit." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed a new phrase into the blank space. "Tech support enthusiast." She leaned back, admiring her work. "See, that is much better. It sounds friendly. It sounds like you are eager to help people fix their computers. It lowers the barrier to entry." I stared at the screen. The lead AI medical architect of an $80 million corporate restructuring initiative was currently being rebranded as a tech support enthusiast by a junior marketing coordinator whose most significant daily achievement was ordering catering for client pitches. I did not laugh. I did not correct her. I simply observed. This was the dynamic my family required. This was the fiction that kept their fragile egos intact. Victoria needed to believe she was the successful sibling rescuing her hopeless sister from perpetual unemployment. If I shattered that illusion, if I revealed the depth of my actual leverage, her entire identity would fracture. And yet, the knowledge of the stolen trust funds hummed in my veins like a live wire. She was sitting at my kitchen island, butchering my credentials while actively siphoning thousands of dollars from our grandfather's estate to fund her lifestyle brand. The breathtaking hypocrisy of her career advice was almost poetic. I could have confronted her right then. I could have pulled up the ledger, shown her the unauthorized withdrawals, and demanded an explanation. But premature confrontation is the hallmark of an amateur. If I accused her now without airtight notarized proof from the digital bank holding her accounts, she would simply cry. She would call our mother. Susan would twist the narrative, framing me as a jealous, paranoid sister trying to ruin Victoria's happiness before her engagement. The truth would be buried under an avalanche of Minnesota Nice emotional manipulation. I needed a paper trail. I needed a trap so flawless that no amount of tears or tailored blazers could dismantle it. So I remained silent. I nodded slowly, staring at the words, "tech support enthusiast." "You really think that will help?" I asked, forcing a note of mild uncertainty into my voice. Victoria smiled. It was a bright, victorious expression. "Trust me, Adela. I understand how the corporate world operates. It is all about packaging. You have to sell the right version of yourself." She closed her laptop and slid it back into her tote bag. She zipped the bag with a sharp, final motion. "I am glad we had this talk. You have so much potential. You just need proper guidance." She picked up her iced coffee and headed toward the entryway. I followed her, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. I was calculating the exact legal steps required to subpoena the routing numbers from the holding account. "Oh, I almost forgot." Victoria said, turning around with her hand on the doorknob. "Liam is going to be incredibly busy over the next few weeks. He is gunning for a director promotion." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "Is he?" "Yes," Victoria beamed. "OmniHealth brought in this terrifying new chief technology officer. Nobody knows what she looks like, but she is supposed to be ruthless. Liam says she is auditing the entire data integration division. He is preparing a comprehensive presentation to secure his spot on her executive team. If he gets this director role, our whole future is set." I kept my expression entirely blank. My heart executed a slow, rhythmic pulse against my ribs. "Anyway," Victoria continued, oblivious to the silence. "Once Liam gets on the good side of the new CTO and secures his promotion, I will ask him to put in a good word for you. He knows all the department heads. With your new resume, I bet he could get you an interview in the mailroom or maybe the IT help desk. It would be a great foot in the door." "That is very generous of him," I said quietly. Victoria offered one last pitying smile. "What are sisters for? Keep your head up, Adela. Things will turn around." She opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, sealing the loft in silence once again. I stood in the entryway for a long time. The scent of her expensive perfume lingered in the air, a chemical reminder of the money she had taken from me. I walked back to my home office and woke my monitors. The red error message of the stolen trust funds illuminated my face. Victoria had just handed me the master key to her own destruction. She believed she was playing a sophisticated game of corporate strategy, manipulating her wealthy boyfriend into a promotion, while keeping her jobless sister firmly in her place. She had no idea that the terrifying, ruthless executive Liam was desperately trying to impress, was currently standing in her bare feet, looking at the evidence of her felony. The chessboard was set. My sister had just gleefully positioned her knight directly into the path of my queen. I sat down at my keyboard, dismissed the screensaver, and began to draft the zero-tolerance audit protocols for Liam's department. The time for passive observation was over. Aunt Valerie arrived in the Twin Cities on a Thursday morning. She brought the sharp, unyielding energy of the East Coast, with her cutting straight through the passive-aggressive fog of our local culture. Valerie was my father's sister. She was a corporate strategist based in Manhattan. She wore tailored emerald silk and possessed a stare that could dissect a balance sheet from across a room. As a highly successful African-American woman navigating elite financial sectors, Valerie had zero tolerance for the superficial performance my mother demanded. We met for a welcome lunch at an exclusive French bistro in the North Loop. The restaurant was a cathedral of brushed brass and velvet seating. Susan orchestrated the seating arrangement, placing Victoria at the center of the semicircular booth. I was directed to the edge, positioned near the waiter station. Victoria spent the first hour dominating the conversation. She complained loudly about the crushing interest rates on her premium credit cards. She attempted to sound like a seasoned investor managing complex assets. In reality, she was drowning in retail debt to maintain her social media aesthetic. Susan nodded along, validating the financial struggle as a necessary burden of high society living. The waiter brought the leather-bound folio containing the bill. The total was over $400. Victoria suddenly became intensely interested in replying to a text message. Susan reached for her purse with agonizing slowness. It was a rehearsed maneuver designed to prompt someone else to intervene. I did not sigh. I did not hesitate. I reached into my coat pocket, withdrew a heavy matte black titanium card, and placed it on the tray. The waiter swept it away instantly. Valerie did not miss a single frame of the interaction. She watched Victoria exhale in relief. She watched Susan accept the payment as a fundamental right. Then Valerie locked her dark, assessing eyes on me. She noted the weight of the metal card. She noted my complete lack of anxiety over dropping $400 on a Tuesday afternoon. Susan and Victoria excused themselves to visit the restroom to reapply their makeup. Valerie and I were left alone at the table. Valerie took a slow sip of her sparkling water. She set the crystal glass down precisely on the coaster. "You are subsidizing them," she said. It was not a question. It was a forensic conclusion. I looked out the window at the pedestrian traffic. "I just wanted a quiet lunch, Aunt Valerie." "It is easier to pay than to argue." Valerie leaned forward, resting her forearms on the brass table. "Easier for whom, Adela? You sit at the edge of the booth like a chaperone. You let your mother introduce you to strangers as a cautionary tale. And then you quietly fund the very lifestyle they use to mock you. Why do you allow yourself to be treated like a disgraced secret?" "I do not need their validation," I replied, keeping my voice low. "My life is perfectly structured without their approval." Valerie shook her head, a gesture of profound disappointment. "You think your silence is a shield. You think hiding your success keeps you safe from their envy. You are miscalculating the board." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling the temperature in my veins drop. Valerie told me what Susan had been broadcasting to the extended family back east. Susan was not just telling people I was unemployed. She was actively weaving a narrative of mental instability. Susan had called Valerie 3 weeks ago, sighing into the receiver, whispering about a tragic quarter-life crisis. Susan claimed I had suffered a nervous breakdown. She told the family I was unemployable, that I spent my days staring at the wall, and that Victoria was bravely taking on the emotional burden of caring for me. The bistro around me seemed to blur. The clinking of silverware faded into a dull roar. A nervous breakdown, unemployable. My mother was not just hiding my existence to protect Victoria's spotlight. She was assassinating my character to elevate Victoria to the status of a martyr. Let us examine the malicious brilliance of my mother's strategy. By categorizing me as mentally unfit, she was quietly stripping away my credibility. If I ever decided to speak up, if I ever attempted to expose Victoria's financial crimes, who would believe me? The extended family would simply view my accusations as the paranoid delusions of a woman suffering a breakdown. Susan was preemptively discrediting the only witness to her golden child's felony. It was a masterclass in reputational manipulation. I felt a cold sweat prickle along my spine. The $15,000 bridge loan was nothing compared to the psychological theft they were executing. They were stealing my sanity to cover their tracks. My logic fractured. I had spent years treating my family like a complex algorithm. I believed that if I input enough compliance, if I provided enough capital, the output would be peace. But Valerie had just handed me the raw data. The algorithm was malicious. "Your mother is building a fortress of lies," Valerie said quietly, "and she is using your reputation as the bricks. The longer you stay quiet, the more permanent the fiction becomes. When Liam's parents arrive, Susan will present you as the fragile, broken sister. They will pity you, and Victoria will shine by comparison." I thought about the forged credit application sitting on my hard drive. I thought about the $15,000 transfer. I thought about Liam, the data integration manager, whose division I was preparing to gut. If I was mentally unstable, Victoria could easily rationalize the forgery as managing my affairs if she ever got caught. The theft was insidious. The narrative was premeditated. Valerie watched the realization wash over my features. She did not offer empty comfort. She offered strategy. She told me that power only responds to power. You cannot negotiate with people who view your existence as a public relations crisis. You have to change the currency of the relationship. I picked up my receipt. The ink was dark against the crisp white paper. I folded it precisely in half. "You are right, Aunt Valerie," I said. My voice was no longer flat. It was sharp. "I have been playing the wrong game entirely." Valerie offered a small, terrifying smile. She recognized the shift in my posture. She recognized the executive taking over the room. "Good," she said softly, "because a woman with your resources should never sit at the edge of the table." The anger did not arrive as a fiery explosion. It settled into my stomach like a block of ice. It was a clinical, calculating fury. I was the chief technology officer of a global medical conglomerate. I managed thousands of employees and billions of dollars in infrastructure. I did not need to endure suburban warfare. I could simply end it. When Susan and Victoria slid back into the booth, their movements were fluid and confident. Victoria smelled of fresh perfume. Susan adjusted her designer scarf. They looked at me with the same condescending pity they always wore, entirely unaware that the foundation of their entire world had just cracked. Victoria launched into a detailed monologue about Liam's upcoming formal dinner. It was a corporate event, hosted by OmniHealth, to evaluate mid-level management for executive promotions. Liam was terrified, Victoria explained, popping a piece of artisan bread into her mouth. He has to impress the senior partners. He has been working on a data presentation for weeks. Susan turned to me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "We are all going to support him. But Adela, I need you to understand how critical this night is. You need to wear something appropriate, nothing too casual, but please keep a low profile. Do not talk about your employment situation. We want Liam to look like he is marrying into a stable, successful family." I looked at the woman who had given me life. I saw the calculation behind her smile. I saw the fear driving her every action. She was so desperate to secure Victoria's position in high society that she was willing to bury me alive to do it. "I will wear the black silk dress," I said smoothly, "and I promise you, Mom, I will not say a single word about my employment situation. I will let Liam command the room entirely." Susan exhaled, visibly relieved by my compliance. "Thank you, Adela. That is very mature of you." Valerie caught my eye across the table. She raised her glass a fraction of an inch in a silent, knowing salute. The trap was set. My family was happily marching toward the precipice, blinded by their own arrogance, and I was going to be the one to push them over the edge. The dining room table was set with Susan's second-best porcelain, the delicate floral patterns partially obscured by heavy silver serving dishes. It was a Thursday evening, a strategic gathering meticulously designed to fortify Liam before his crucial corporate performance review on Friday morning. The scent of roasted pork loin and glazed carrots filled the air, a savory aroma that usually indicated a celebration. I sat in my usual spot near the kitchen door, the designated position for the family liability, watching the performance unfold. Liam did not look like the confident corporate conqueror who had graced our table 2 weeks prior. The tailored navy blazer was gone, replaced by a slightly wrinkled Oxford shirt. He kept shifting his weight in the antique dining chair, the wooden joints groaning softly under his anxiety. He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it disorganized. The arrogant bravado had evaporated. He was a man facing a professional guillotine, and he knew the blade was dropping soon. Victoria poured him a generous glass of red wine, offering a soothing, practiced smile that she reserved for high-value networking. "You are going to do wonderfully tomorrow, Liam. You have prepared for this review for weeks. They would be blank not to bump you up to director status." Liam took a long swallow of the wine. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. "It is not just a standard review, Victoria. The entire climate at OmniHealth has shifted overnight. The board brought in this new chief technology officer. Nobody has seen her face. She skipped the introductory town hall meetings and went straight into the mainframe. She is auditing every single department from the ground up." Susan leaned forward, her eyes wide with manufactured sympathy. "That sounds terribly stressful, Liam, but surely a man with your leadership skills has nothing to worry about. You are a natural executive." He shook his head, staring grimly at his half-empty glass. "You do not understand, Susan. This new executive is a terrifying visionary. She does not care about tenure or office politics or who plays golf with the regional vice presidents. She operates purely on metrics. People are getting termination emails at 3 in the morning. My boss is terrified. The vice presidents are terrified." I sliced a small piece of pork and brought it to my mouth, chewing slowly. The dining room was warm, heated by the oven and the crowded table. But a cold, satisfying thrill traced the line of my spine. I was the ghost haunting his corporate nightmares. Liam placed his fork down, his appetite clearly gone. He looked around the table, his eyes wide and panicked. The internal memo she sent to the division heads yesterday was chilling. She wrote that algorithmic efficiency must supersede legacy hierarchy. "We are transitioning to a zero-tolerance model for redundant administration." I stopped chewing. I picked up my crystal water goblet and brought it to my lips. The heavy glass masked the sudden razor-sharp smile that broke across my face. Algorithmic efficiency must supersede legacy hierarchy. I had typed those exact words while sitting on my sofa wearing sweatpants 3 days ago. I had paused for a moment, wondering if the phrasing was too harsh, before hitting send on the encrypted executive portal. Hearing my own corporate edict recited back to me in my mother's dining room, delivered with reverence and terror by the man who thought I was an unemployed loser, was a delicacy no luxury chef could ever replicate. I set the water glass down. The ice clinked softly against the crystal. I decided to test the waters. That sounds like a complex transition, Liam, I said, keeping my voice mild and inquisitive. If she is focusing on algorithmic efficiency, is your data integration team currently utilizing a centralized cloud infrastructure, or are you still patching together legacy servers to handle the patient load? The question was precise. It was the exact vulnerability I had spotted in his departmental overview. If Liam actually understood the mechanics of his job, he would have a defensive strategy prepared for that exact metric. Liam blinked, clearly caught off guard by the technical vocabulary coming from the family disappointment. He opened his mouth to formulate a response, his brow furrowing as he searched for the right corporate jargon to deflect the inquiry. Before he could speak a single word, Susan slammed her hand flat against the mahogany table. The silverware rattled against the porcelain. Adela, Susan snapped. Her voice was sharp, shedding the polite Minnesota nice veneer for a fraction of a second. Stop pestering Liam with your random internet buzzwords. He is under an immense amount of pressure. He does not have the time or the energy to explain basic computer concepts to you right now. Do not bore him with things you do not understand. I looked at my mother. Her face was flushed with irritation. She was acting as Liam's human shield, protecting him from the intellectual strain of engaging with her own daughter. The corporate power dynamic in the room was entirely inverted, but Susan was enforcing the fictional hierarchy with an iron fist. She was so deeply invested in the myth of Liam's superiority that she perceived my genuine technical inquiry as an offensive nuisance. Victoria chimed in, patting Liam's shoulder soothingly. Just ignore her, Liam. Adela reads these tech blogs all day since she has nothing else to do. She likes to pretend she knows how the corporate world works. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or attempt to defend my knowledge. I simply picked up my fork and returned to my meal. You are right, I said quietly. I apologize, Liam. I will let you get back to your preparation. The tension at the table slowly dissolved, replaced by a chorus of validation from Susan and Victoria. They spent the next hour inflating his ego, assuring him that he was the most vital asset OmniHealth possessed. They rebuilt his armor with empty compliments and blind loyalty. Liam absorbed the praise greedily. The color returned to his face. The nervous sweat dried. By the time dessert was served, he was once again the arrogant corporate climber, convinced of his own untouchable status. When the meal concluded, Victoria offered to walk Liam out to his car. They stepped into the chilly night air, leaving the front door slightly ajar. Susan immediately began clearing the good china, humming a cheerful tune, deeply satisfied with her successful hosting performance. I stood up to gather my own plates. As I reached across the table, my eyes locked onto a heavy, dark leather portfolio resting next to Liam's empty wine glass. He had been so distracted by Victoria's flattery that he had forgotten his essential review materials. I glanced toward the kitchen. Susan was running the faucet, the sound of rushing water masking my movements. I walked around the table and stood directly over the portfolio. The leather was supple, embossed with the silver OmniHealth corporate logo. I did not need to unzip the main compartment. Sticking out from the top pocket was a thick stack of printed presentation slides. The top sheet functioned as a cover page. It displayed Liam's full name, his current job title, and a specific string of alphanumeric characters representing his internal departmental code. Division 4, Sector 7, Data Integration and Legacy Management. My breath caught in my throat. The dining room faded away. The sounds of my mother washing dishes became distant static. Sector 7. I had spent 4 hours analyzing the efficiency reports for Sector 7 yesterday afternoon. It was the most bloated, unproductive division in the entire regional branch. It was a black hole of corporate resources, managed by people who specialized in writing reports about other reports. I had flagged Sector 7 for an immediate comprehensive audit. I had personally drafted the directive instructing human resources to prepare severance packages for the entire management tier of that specific sector. Liam was not just facing a tough review tomorrow. He was walking directly into a corporate slaughterhouse that I had designed. I heard the front door click shut. Victoria walked back into the dining room, a dreamy smile plastered across her face. She spotted the leather case on the table and let out a sharp gasp. "Oh no," Victoria said, rushing forward to grab the portfolio. "Liam left his presentation. He needs this for his meeting tomorrow morning. He is going to panic." She pulled her phone from her pocket and began typing a frantic text message to him. I stood perfectly still, holding my empty dessert plate. I watched my sister fret over a stack of papers that were already mathematically worthless. "I hope he does well tomorrow," I told Victoria. My voice was smooth, devoid of any sharp edges or hidden malice. Victoria did not even look up from her glowing screen. "Of course he will do well, Adela. He is essential. OmniHealth would fall apart without him." I carried my plate into the kitchen. The logic of the situation was overwhelmingly perfect. My mother had just silenced me to protect a man whose career I had already legally terminated. My sister was desperately trying to secure her future by attaching herself to a sinking corporate ship. They were so busy managing the optics of success that they had ignored the mechanics of survival. The digital breadcrumbs had formed a clear, inescapable path. The family trust was bleeding money to fund Victoria's fake lifestyle. Liam was unknowingly seeking a promotion from the woman his future mother-in-law treated like a disease. And my Aunt Valerie's warning echoed clearly in my mind. The time for passive observation was over. I needed to return to my loft. I had a corporate review to finalize, and I needed to make certain that Liam's termination protocols were processed with flawless efficiency. I returned to my loft late Thursday night. The city below was dark, illuminated only by the grid of streetlights and the headlights of passing vehicles. The air inside my apartment was cool and sterile. I walked straight past the kitchen, ignoring the lingering scent of my mother's roasted pork that clung to my coat. I tossed my keys onto the granite counter and headed directly for my home office. The monitors woke from their sleep state the moment I touched the mouse. The red error message from the family trust reconciliation was still glowing on the primary display. Earlier that morning, I had discovered the slow bleed of funds. A few $1,000s here and there routed to an ambiguous digital holding account. But my encounter with Liam and the revelation of his impending corporate demise had sharpened my focus. I was no longer interested in a casual review. I was initiating a forensic audit. I opened a secure terminal and logged into my master financial dashboard. As the chief technology officer of a global medical conglomerate, I possessed a pristine credit profile. My debt-to-income ratio was practically non-existent. I maintained multiple layers of identity protection. I triggered a comprehensive pull of my personal credit reports from all 3 major bureaus. The data populated across my secondary screen in dense columns of raw information. I scrolled past the standard items. My mortgage was current. My premium charge cards carried 0 balances. Everything appeared normal until I reached the revolving credit section. A new entry sat near the bottom of the list. It was a commercial line of credit issued by a secondary-tier financial institution known for funding high-risk startup ventures. The origination date was 8 months ago. The approved limit was $65,000. The current balance was maxed out. $64,912 were gone. My hands grew cold. I pulled up the guarantor details. The loan was registered under my full legal name, utilizing my social security number, and it cited the assets of the family trust as the primary collateral. The listed business entity receiving the capital was a luxury wellness and aesthetic consulting firm. It was a shell company Victoria had created 2 years ago to legitimize her social media influencer aspirations. She had not just borrowed a little money for rent or a vacation. She had leveraged my identity to underwrite her failing lifestyle brand. I accessed the lender portal using a backdoor security protocol I had designed for corporate compliance checks. I navigated through their digital archives and located the original loan application. I clicked the file. A scanned document loaded onto my central monitor. It was a standard commercial credit agreement, dense with legal jargon and terrifying interest rates. I bypassed the terms and conditions, scrolling straight to the final page. There, sitting above the printed line of my name, was my signature. I leaned closer to the high-resolution screen. The blue ink stood out starkly against the white background. It was a masterful forgery. The loops of the letters were precise. The spacing was accurate. But the undeniable tell was the slight, specific lean to the right. My natural handwriting was strictly vertical, a byproduct of years spent writing code and drafting architectural schematics. This signature tilted just a fraction of a degree toward the margin. The memory surfaced with crystalline clarity. I was 16 years old, sitting at the kitchen island doing calculus homework. Victoria was sitting across from me, a sophomore in high school, holding a blue ballpoint pen. She had failed a semester of chemistry. Instead of studying, she had spent an hour meticulously tracing our father's signature onto a blank piece of paper, practicing the exact pressure and flow until she could replicate it flawlessly on her report card. She had bragged about her talent for weeks, calling it a survival skill. She had weaponized that survival skill against her own sister. I sat back in my ergonomic chair. The ambient hum of the computer servers in the closet felt deafening. The narrative shifted profoundly in my mind. The psychological manipulation, the endless condescension, the orchestrated pity at Sunday dinners, none of it was an accident. It was not just toxic family dynamics or maternal favoritism. It was a calculated smokescreen. Susan and Victoria needed me to believe I was a fragile, unemployable disappointment. They needed me isolated, doubting my own competence, and desperate for their sparse crumbs of approval. If I was busy navigating their emotional landmines, I would never look closely at the ledgers. If I felt indebted to them for their supposed patience, I would never question the subtle shifts in the family trust. The emotional cruelty was merely the required maintenance for their financial exploitation. The sibling betrayal was total and unequivocal. Victoria had effectively stolen $65,000 in my name. The crime carried severe federal penalties: wire fraud, identity theft, bank fraud. My lingering guilt over asserting my boundaries vanished. The hesitation that had plagued me for years evaporated into the cool, conditioned air of the loft. I was no longer dealing with a sister who needed a bridge loan for a botanical garden party. I was dealing with a felon who was actively destroying my financial infrastructure to buy designer blazers and fund trips to Tulum. A terrifying new dilemma crystallized before me. I held the undeniable documented proof of her crime. I could package the PDF draft, a sworn affidavit, and hand the entire dossier to the local authorities by morning. Victoria would face criminal charges. Her pristine reputation would shatter. Liam would undoubtedly flee the moment the scandal broke. Her life as she knew it would end in a courtroom. The alternative was equally daunting. I could absorb the $65,000 debt. I could pay off the loan quietly, close the account, and lock down my credit profile permanently. It would cost me a fraction of my yearly bonus. I could maintain the pleasant, frictionless facade my mother valued above all else. I could buy their peace for the low price of my own dignity. I stared at the forged signature on the monitor. The ink mocked me. It was a symbol of their ultimate assumption. They believed I was too weak, too desperate for family connection to ever strike back. They assumed that even if I found the discrepancies, I would quietly fix them to avoid the unbearable discomfort of confrontation. They relied on my adherence to Minnesota nice. I reached out and traced the edge of the monitor with my index finger. The glass was cold. I closed the PDF and exported a copy of the entire application into an encrypted folder on my secure local drive. I gathered the routing numbers, the IP addresses utilized during the application process, and the itemized transaction logs. I built a digital vault of evidence that no defense attorney could ever dismantle. I was not going to absorb the debt, but I was also not going to hand the victory over to the legal system just yet. Sending her to prison would be a bureaucratic resolution. It lacked the necessary poetic justice. Victoria had built her entire existence on the perception of high society success. She valued her image more than her freedom. Stripping away that image in the most excruciating public manner possible was the only appropriate response to the theft of my identity. I opened a new text document on my screen and began outlining a sequence of events. First, the Omni Health data integration audit would proceed as planned. Liam would be surgically removed from his position of power, cutting off Victoria's access to his future corporate salary. Second, I needed to force the family into an arena where their fictional narrative would collide directly with my factual leverage. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating against the smooth wood. I glanced at the glowing screen. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. It was past midnight, an unusual time for Susan to reach out. I let it ring 3 times, allowing the suspense to build, before I swiped the screen and accepted the call. "Adela," Susan said. Her voice lacked its usual administrative brightness. It sounded tight, rushed, and laced with a new demanding edge. "Are you awake? We need to discuss the arrangements for the cocktail hour next week. Victoria has encountered a slight logistical issue with her apartment." I kept my eyes fixed on the encrypted folder containing the felony evidence. "I am awake, Mom," I replied softly. "What kind of logistical issue?" The trap was advancing faster than I anticipated. They were moving onto my territory, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath them was already wired to detonate. "Victoria realized her floor plan is simply too restrictive for a proper reception," Susan said through the phone speaker. The audio quality was crisp, carrying every nuance of her manufactured urgency. "Liam has parents who are accustomed to significant real estate. His family originates from old Boston wealth. We cannot host them in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. It sends the wrong message. We need to use your loft, Adela." I stared at the encrypted folder on my monitor. The folder containing the felony evidence of my sister forging my signature. I kept my breathing slow and rhythmic. "You want to host the pre-engagement cocktail hour here?" "Yes," Susan replied smoothly. She framed the demand not as an imposition, but as a generous avenue for my redemption. "It is a wonderful opportunity for you to make yourself useful. You have all that expansive square footage just sitting empty. It overlooks the river. It presents a sophisticated image. Plus, you have the time to help us prepare since your schedule is entirely open." The audacity hung in the quiet air of my home office. My family was staging a hostile takeover of my physical sanctuary. They planned to utilize my property to impress the very man whose corporate career I held in the palm of my hand. "I will clear my schedule," I said. My voice was a flat, unreadable surface. "I knew you would understand," Susan said. "We will come over tomorrow afternoon to assess the layout." "Make sure the place is spotless, Adela." The line went dead. I set the device down on the polished wood desk. The following afternoon, my mother and sister arrived at my building. They did not knock. Susan utilized the spare key I had given her years ago for emergencies. They strode into my foyer wearing matching trench coats and an air of unquestioned authority. They treated my multi-million-dollar residence like a rented banquet hall. Victoria walked straight to the floor-to-ceiling windows, admiring the panoramic view of the Minneapolis skyline. "This will work perfectly," she announced. "We can set up the high-top tables along the glass. The caterers can use the kitchen island for the carving station." I stood near the hallway, watching them measure my living space with their greedy eyes. When I originally purchased this property at age 25, using the bonuses from my early algorithmic patents, Susan had refused to attend the housewarming. She had deemed the industrial architecture too cold and the neighborhood too urban. Now, the cold architecture was exactly the aesthetic she required to execute her high society illusion. Susan unbuttoned her coat and turned to me. She retrieved a thick, cream-colored piece of cardstock from her designer handbag. She held it out. I stepped forward and took the heavy paper. It was a detailed itinerary and a comprehensive grocery list. We decided against external caterers, Susan explained, brushing an invisible speck of dust from her sleeve. Bringing strangers into the kitchen disrupts the intimate atmosphere we are trying to cultivate. You enjoy cooking, Adela. I have listed the hors d'oeuvres we expect you to prepare and plate: prosciutto wrapped asparagus, artisanal cheese boards, and the miniature crab cakes Liam favors. I scanned the cardstock. The ingredients alone would cost several $100s. I was expected to fund the menu, prepare the food, and host the event in my own home. And there is one more thing Susan added. Her tone dropped an octave, shifting into the gentle, patronizing register she reserved for delivering insults. When Liam and his parents arrive, it might be best if you stay in the primary bedroom. I looked up from the list. My expression remained entirely neutral, though the air in my lungs turned to ice. You want me to hide in my bedroom? Susan offered a sympathetic, tight-lipped smile. We do not want to confuse his family, Adela. They are traditional people. A jobless young woman inhabiting a luxury penthouse creates uncomfortable questions. They might wonder how you afford such a place without an income. We want to spare you the exhaustion of explaining your situation to strangers. It is just easier for everyone if Liam thinks Victoria secured the venue through her marketing connections. The maternal suppression and the obsession with class perception had merged into a spectacle of profound absurdity. They were exuding me from my own home while simultaneously forcing me to cater their party within it. My mother was rewriting the deed to my property in real time to elevate Victoria's status. A younger version of myself would have shattered. A younger Adela would have wept, begged for inclusion, or lashed out in a futile attempt to defend her dignity. But the woman standing in the kitchen was the Chief Technology Officer of OmniHealth. I possessed the undeniable proof of wire fraud on my hard drive. The emotional manipulation no longer wounded me. It merely fascinated me. That makes sense, I said quietly. I will stay in the back suite once the guests arrive. I can plate the appetizers and leave them on the island before the Boston relatives walk through the door. Susan exhaled, her shoulders dropping in palpable relief. Thank you, sweetheart. I knew we could count on you to be mature about this. You are being such a supportive sister. Victoria wandered over from the windows, scrolling through her phone. Liam is going to be so thrilled. He is drowning in preparation for his OmniHealth review tomorrow. The new technology executive is tearing through the corporate hierarchy. His department is under a microscope. Having a flawless evening here will give him the exact confidence boost he needs. I folded the cream-colored cardstock and slipped it into the pocket of my trousers. I hope he gets exactly what he deserves, I replied. My compliance was entirely tactical. By agreeing to their ridiculous demands, I resolved their immediate logistical panic. I gave them a false sense of absolute security. They believed they had successfully neutralized their problematic relative. They thought I was pacified, obedient, and thoroughly defeated. In reality, my concession granted me the one asset I required to finalize their destruction: unrestricted time. In order to execute my trap flawlessly, I needed 48 hours. I had to contact the commercial lending institution holding Victoria's forged line of credit. I needed to request physical, certified copies of the loan origination documents. A standard digital download was insufficient for the confrontation I was planning. I required paperwork stamped by a licensed notary, shipped overnight via a secure courier. I also needed to finalize the automated termination sequence for the data integration sector at work. Agreeing to be their invisible caterer provided the perfect cover story. While Susan and Victoria spent the next 2 days selecting floral arrangements and agonizing over napkins, I would be locked in my office. They would assume I was diligently researching crab cake recipes. Instead, I would be drafting corporate severance protocols and communicating with fraud investigators. My internal state had shifted permanently. The passive victim who once sought her family's approval was dead replaced by a cold, calculating architect. I was building a guillotine, and my mother had just cheerfully volunteered to paint the scaffolding. Susan and Victoria spent another hour debating the optimal placement of the cocktail bar before declaring their scouting mission a success. They departed with breezy farewells, leaving me alone in the silent expanse of my hijacked sanctuary. I walked to the kitchen island and placed the grocery list on the marble surface. The juxtaposition of my two impending tasks was striking. On Friday morning, I would authorize a corporate audit that would end the career of my sister's wealthy benefactor. On Friday evening, I would bake appetizers in my own oven while hiding in my bedroom to protect my sister's fragile ego. I retrieved my tablet from the home office and drafted an encrypted email to my personal attorney. I detailed the discovery of the forged signature and requested an immediate consultation regarding the formal drafting of a cease and desist order. The bureaucracy of peace in my family had always been managed through silence and wire transfers. It was time to introduce them to the bureaucracy of consequence. The trap was fully constructed. The bait was set. My family was happily marching into the venue, unaware that the host they had banished to the shadows was the sole owner of the locks on the doors. The secure courier arrived precisely at 8 o'clock on Friday morning. The heavy cardboard envelope felt cold in my hands. Inside were the certified notarized copies of Victoria's commercial loan application. The ink was dark. The notary stamp provided a raised tactile seal of authenticity. It was the physical manifestation of my sister's felony. Susan arrived 40 minutes later. She carried a woven basket filled with freshly pressed linen napkins for the evening cocktail hour. She bustled into my kitchen, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She hummed a cheerful off-key melody, oblivious to the guillotine waiting on the counter. I stood by the island holding the printed documents. I had rehearsed various versions of this confrontation. In some variations, I imagined my mother bursting into tears, dismayed by the depths of Victoria's deceit. I imagined her apologizing, realizing how she had enabled a monster. I placed the stack of papers directly on the marble surface, intercepting her path. "What is this?" Susan asked. She set her basket down, her forehead wrinkling in mild annoyance. "We have a strict schedule today, Adela. The florist is delivering the centerpieces at noon." "Read it," I said. My tone lacked any inflection. Susan sighed, retrieved her reading glasses from her designer purse, and slid them onto the bridge of her nose. She picked up the first page. I watched her eyes scan the legal jargon. I tracked the microscopic shifts in her facial muscles. She reached the final page. She saw the forged signature. She saw the requested total of $65,000. She saw the listed collateral tying the debt to our grandfather's trust. A normal parent would drop the paper. A normal parent would gasp, reach for the counter to steady themselves, or demand an immediate explanation from the offending child. My mother did none of those things. Susan went entirely still. The cheerful humming ceased. Her gaze darted from the blue ink to the windows, as if checking to ensure the neighbors across the river could not witness the transgression. The color drained from her cheeks, replaced by an ashen, panicked pallor. But the panic was not directed at the crime. It was directed at the paper trail. "Where did you get this?" Susan whispered. Her voice carried the tight, frantic energy of a politician discovering a leaked memo. "I ordered certified copies from the lending institution," I replied. Victoria bypassed the trust security protocols. She utilized my pristine credit score to secure a commercial line of credit for her lifestyle brand. She faked my handwriting. "The balance is entirely maxed out." Susan looked at the document again. Her hands began to tremble, not with righteous indignation, but with terrified calculation. She remembered the time my father broke his collarbone falling off a ladder. Before taking him to the emergency room, Susan had forced him to change out of his stained yard work shirt so the triage nurses would not think we were low class. Optics always superseded triage. Susan carefully aligned the edges of the papers. She picked up a decorative woven placemat resting near the center of the island. With surgical precision, she slid the undeniable proof of her golden child's felony beneath the placemat, hiding it from view. She smoothed the fabric flat, prioritizing the aesthetic of the dining space over the reality of the fraud. "Keep it pleasant," she whispered. The phrase was an invocation. It was the family motto deployed to banish anything inconvenient. I stared at the placemat. The fictional versus the factual conflict had just reached its boiling point. "Mom," I said softly, Your youngest daughter committed wire fraud. She stole my identity." "Lower your voice," Susan hissed. She glanced toward the empty hallway. "Victoria was desperate, Adela. You know how hard she works to maintain her brand. She was just trying to build a future." "She stole $65,000, I repeated, refusing to let her soften the terminology. Susan took a step closer to me. She removed her glasses, her eyes hardening into twin points of polished steel. She was no longer a fooled bystander. She was the willing referee, and she was officially sending me to the penalty box. "You have millions," Susan stated. Her voice was cold and pragmatic. "Your grandfather handed you an empire on a silver platter, while Victoria had to fight for every scrap of social standing. 65,000 is nothing to you. It is a drop in the bucket." "It is the principle of the theft," I countered. "Principles do not secure advantageous marriages," Susan snapped. "Liam is on the verge of a major promotion at OmniHealth today. His parents are flying in this afternoon. If this gets out, if you cause a scene and involve lawyers, you will humiliate us. Liam will cancel the engagement. His Boston family will view us as common criminals. You will ruin your sister's entire life over a rounding error in your bank account." I felt the floor drop away beneath me. The sensation was not heartbreak. Heartbreak is warm and messy. This was an icy, clarifying void. "You want me to pay it?" I asked. "I want you to absorb the debt," quietly Susan demanded. Her tone was an explicit ultimatum. "You will log into your portal, pay off the balance, and close the account. You will never mention this to Victoria. You will never mention this to Liam. You will stay in your back bedroom tonight during the cocktail hour, and you will let this family secure its future." I looked at the woman standing in front of me. For 28 years, I had held on to a fragile, childish hope that if I just proved my worth, my mother would eventually protect me. If I paid enough bills, if I remained quiet enough, if I endured enough insults, she would eventually recognize my value and defend me. That illusion fractured and dissolved into dust. Susan was never going to protect me. Peace in this family was a commodity, and it was purchased exclusively with my name and my credit. My mother was willing to sacrifice my financial security, my legal standing, and my sanity just to ensure her favorite daughter got a country club wedding. The internal reckoning finalized itself within the span of 3 heartbeats. I did not scream. I did not cry. Crying was a currency used by people who had no other leverage. I simply nodded. The nod was not an agreement. It was an acknowledgement of the new rules of engagement. If she wanted to operate like a ruthless corporate negotiator protecting a bad asset, I would treat her like one. "I understand your perspective perfectly, Mom," I said. My voice was level, echoing the flat acoustics of a boardroom. Susan exhaled a long, shaky breath. She reached out and squeezed my arm. Her fingers felt like a vice. "I knew you would do the right thing, Adela. You are a good sister. Family protects family. Now please start prepping the asparagus. The caterers are dropping off the carving station equipment at 3 o'clock. She turned her back to me and began unpacking the crisp linen napkins, her cheerful humming slowly returning to the quiet kitchen. I reached under the placemat and retrieved the certified documents. I folded them and slid them into my pocket. My mother had just given me permission to execute my revenge without a single ounce of lingering guilt. She had chosen the fiction. I was going to deliver the facts. The evening cocktail hour was merely the appetizer. The true execution would commence tomorrow morning at the luxury country club brunch, where the extended families were scheduled to meet for the very first time. I turned toward the refrigerator to gather the ingredients, mentally finalizing the administrative precision required to dismantle their entire world. The trap was armed. The timer was ticking. And my family was too busy admiring the tablecloth to notice the bomb sitting underneath it. The Oak Ridge Country Club smelled of polished brass and expensive citrus perfumes. The Sunday pre-engagement brunch was in full swing. Sunlight streamed through the arched windows, illuminating the dust motes hovering over the omelet stations. I navigated the perimeter of the room, playing the exact role my mother had assigned to me. I was the silent ghost, haunting the edges of Victoria's triumphant celebration. Liam stood near the center of the dining room, introducing his parents to the local suburban elite. His father wore a tweed jacket that broadcasted old Boston money. His mother surveyed the floral arrangements with a polite, calculating gaze. Susan fluttered around them, ensuring their champagne flutes were never empty, laughing at jokes that lacked any real humor. I watched the performance from a safe distance. I wore a tailored black dress, simple and unbranded, blending seamlessly into the background. Every time a guest inquired about my presence, Susan materialized from the ether. She would offer a tight, sympathetic smile and whisper about my delicate situation, guiding the conversation back to Victoria's marketing career or Liam's impending promotion. The Minnesota Nice community nodded along, their eyes reflecting a mixture of pity and relief, complicit in my reputational assassination. The hired photographer, a man equipped with a heavy camera harness and a frantic energy, clapped his hands to draw the room's attention. He announced it was time for the formal family portraits. He directed the central figures toward the grand limestone fireplace, arranging them according to height and relation. Victoria stood in the middle, glowing in an ivory silk blouse, clutching Liam's arm. Liam's parents flanked his side. Susan and my father took their places next to Victoria. I took a slow breath, smoothed the fabric of my dress, and stepped forward to join my own family. Before my heel could touch the edge of the woven rug, Susan detached herself from the group. She stepped into my path, her hand extending to gently grip my elbow. Her touch was light, but the instruction beneath it was forged from iron. "Adela," Susan murmured, keeping her voice low enough that the Boston relatives could not hear. "Why do you not sit this one out?" I stopped. I looked at the group forming by the hearth. There was a clear gap waiting for a sister. "The composition will be off," Susan explained, offering a practiced, apologetic grimace. "We have 3 people on Liam's side and 3 on ours. Adding you creates an asymmetry. It will unbalance the photograph. The photographer wants clean lines. You understand." I looked into my mother's eyes. She was prioritizing the geometric balance of a photograph over the inclusion of her own daughter. It was not just an excuse. It was the physical manifestation of my social exile. She was literally erasing my image from the historical record of this family event. A year ago, I would have felt the familiar sting of rejection. I would have argued, lowering my voice to a pleading whisper, asking why I could not just stand in the back row. I would have given them the reaction they expected, validating their power over me. Today, the well of familial grief was dry. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical fascination. "That makes perfect sense, Mom," I said. My voice was smooth, devoid of any friction. "I will step out of the frame." Susan blinked, slightly taken aback by my frictionless compliance. Victoria, standing near the fireplace, watched the interaction with narrow, suspicious eyes. My sister thrived on the friction. She needed me to resent her success so she could feel victorious. By accepting the exile without a fight, I deprived her of the emotional payoff. A flicker of deep unease crossed Victoria's face. She adjusted her grip on Liam's arm, the radiant smile faltering for a fraction of a second. I turned away from the fireplace and walked toward the mimosa bar positioned near the terrace doors. The photographer began snapping pictures, the bright flashes illuminating the smiling faces of the people who had stolen my money and my name. I reached into my coat pocket and wrapped my fingers around the cold titanium of my credit card. The same card that had secured the botanical gardens, the same credit profile Victoria had hijacked to secure her fraudulent loan. I stood there, holding the financial foundation of the entire room, watching them perform their pantomime of high society grace. A tall figure appeared beside me. Aunt Valerie leaned against the polished mahogany bar. She wore a striking crimson blazer that defied the muted pastel color palette of the country club. She held 2 crystal flutes filled with orange juice and champagne. She extended one toward me. I took the glass. The condensation felt cool against my palm. Asymmetry, Valerie said quietly, quoting Susan's excuse. She kept her gaze fixed on the photo session. That is a creative piece of fiction. Your mother missed her calling in corporate public relations. She is very dedicated to the aesthetic, I replied. Valerie turned her head and looked at me. Her dark eyes stripped away the noise of the crowded room. She raised her glass. The rim touched mine with a sharp, clear ring. To the ghosts, Valerie toasted. May they eventually learn how to haunt. I brought the flute to my lips and drank. The citrus was sharp and cold. Valerie did not offer empty platitudes or unsolicited advice. She offered silent, ironclad solidarity. She understood that my lack of a public reaction was not a surrender. It was the quiet before a calculated strike. The brunch progressed seamlessly for the rest of the family. The toasts were delivered, the catered food was consumed. Liam networked with the local business owners, his chest puffed out with impending corporate glory. He spoke confidently about his meeting on Monday, predicting his own ascension into the executive ranks. I checked the subtle silver watch on my wrist. It was 1:45 in the afternoon. The event was scheduled to conclude at 2:30. I had played the obedient, invisible sister for long enough to satisfy my mother's demands. The psychological shift within me was permanent. I no longer belonged in that room, and I no longer desired a seat at their table. I set my empty glass on the bar. I am leaving, I told Valerie. She nodded once. Drive safe, Adela. I did not say goodbye to Susan or Victoria. I slipped out through the terrace doors, navigating the winding stone path that led to the valet station. The crisp Minnesota air filled my lungs, flushing out the suffocating scent of the country club. I handed my ticket to the attendant and waited in the quiet afternoon light. The drive took 20 minutes. The highway stretched before me, a ribbon of gray concrete cutting through the manicured suburban landscape. With every mile that passed, the invisible tethers binding me to my mother's approval snapped. The fiction they curated was fragile, requiring constant maintenance and emotional suppression. The truth was durable. It did not require lighting or good angles. It simply existed. I parked in my reserved spot near the subterranean executive entrance of the Omni Health corporate headquarters. The concrete garage echoed with the slam of my car door. I badged through the high-security turnstiles. The biometric scanners recognized my irises, emitting a soft chime before the heavy glass doors parted. The central elevator bank carried me upward, leaving the ground floor far behind. The executive suite was a cathedral of modern commerce, matte black fixtures, soundproof glass walls, and a noticeable absence of clutter. It was an environment built for binary decisions. I walked into my corner office, the panoramic windows offering a sweeping, uninterrupted view of the Twin Cities skyline. I sat down at my primary workstation and woke the system. The monitors flared to life, casting a cool blue glow across the dark wood desk. I opened the encrypted portal containing the corporate restructuring protocols. I navigated through the organizational charts until I located Sector 7. Liam's name sat near the top of the middle management tier. His upcoming performance review was scheduled for Monday morning at 9 o'clock. He expected a director title and a substantial raise. I opened his digital personnel file. I bypassed the standard review metrics and initiated a terminal audit sequence. I reallocated his entire departmental budget, freezing all internal project funding effective immediately. I drafted the severance parameters, ensuring the automated system would flag his position as structurally obsolete. The algorithm was devoid of pity. It simply measured his output against the company's new technological standards and found him mathematically irrelevant. My family believed they had successfully managed their liability. They thought they had exiled me to the shadows, securing Victoria's fraudulent empire and Liam's ascension. They relied on my passive acceptance to fund their delusions. I typed my administrative credentials into the final authorization prompt. The cursor blinked, waiting for the command. I hit the enter key. The system confirmed the execution. The trap was set, finalized and locked into the corporate mainframe. I leaned back in my leather chair, listening to the quiet hum of the servers, preparing to draft the legal documents that would finish the job. The OmniHealth corporate headquarters remained completely desolate on a Sunday afternoon. Sitting inside my corner executive suite, I felt entirely isolated from the suffocating suburban theatrics that had consumed my morning. The panoramic glass walls offered an unobstructed view of the Minneapolis skyline, the steel and concrete structures standing in stark contrast to the fragile social constructs my family desperately maintained. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and picked up my secure mobile device. The time for passive observation had expired. I was transitioning the battlefield from the realm of emotional manipulation to the undeniable jurisdiction of documented facts. I dialed the direct line from my personal attorney. Marcus was a seasoned legal strategist who specialized in high-net-worth asset protection. He operated with a clinical detachment that I deeply respected. He did not traffic in sentimentality or familial obligations. He dealt exclusively in liabilities contracts and consequences. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and alert, despite the weekend hour. I bypassed the standard pleasantries and instructed him to open the encrypted portal we used for sensitive communications. I watched the transfer bar on my monitor as I uploaded the dossier containing the commercial credit application, the itemized transaction logs, and the undeniable proof of the forged signature. Marcus reviewed the digital files in silence. For several minutes, the only sound on the line was the rapid clicking of his keyboard and the steady hum of my office servers. When he finally spoke, his tone carried a sharp edge of professional incredulity. "Your sister hijacked your identity to secure a $65,000 commercial loan," Marcus stated, summarizing the felony with brutal efficiency. "She utilized the family trust as collateral and blatantly falsified your signature on the origination documents." "That is the accurate assessment," I replied. "My mother is fully aware of the situation. She explicitly demanded that I absorb the financial damages to protect the aesthetic of Victoria's upcoming engagement dinner." Marcus let out a short, humorless breath. He asked if I wanted to bypass civil negotiations and immediately involve federal fraud investigators. He noted that the evidence was ironclad. We could have a warrant issued before the banks opened on Monday morning. I considered the option. Handing the situation to the authorities would be swift, but it lacked the necessary strategic precision. An immediate arrest would allow my mother to spin a narrative of victimhood. Susan would undoubtedly frame me as a vindictive relative who overreacted to a simple misunderstanding. I needed to corner them using their own preferred currency. I needed to destroy their reputation in the exact environment they valued most. "No federal authorities yet," I instructed. "We are going to handle the extraction administratively first. I need you to draft a formal, certified cease and desist order. I want a legally binding demand for the immediate repayment of the stolen capital directed personally to Victoria. Include a drafted criminal complaint as an attachment, clearly stipulating that failure to comply within 48 hours will result in the immediate filing of wire fraud charges." Marcus understood the tactic instantly. He agreed to prepare the paperwork and send a courier to my office within the hour. The call ended, leaving me alone in the cavernous suite. I turned my attention back to the dual monitors illuminating my desk. The personal betrayal regarding the forgery was now moving through the proper legal channels, but the corporate dynamic involving Liam still required finalization. I accessed the Human Resources Administrative mainframe and navigated to Sector 7. Liam was scheduled to undergo his performance review tomorrow morning. He believed he was walking into a routine evaluation that would culminate in a lucrative promotion. He had spent weeks preparing a bloated presentation designed to dazzle his superiors with meaningless jargon and theoretical synergy. I systematically dismantled his professional safety net. Using the new algorithmic efficiency standards I had implemented upon taking the Chief Technology Officer position, I ran a targeted diagnostic on his specific management role. The software quantified his daily output, measured his team's data processing speeds, and evaluated the cost-effectiveness of his administrative overhead. The results were abysmal. His position was a structural black hole, draining resources without providing any tangible technological advancement. I authorized the automated severance protocols for his specific employee identification number. The system generated a termination package, complete with non-disclosure agreements and a modest severance payout. I scheduled the deployment of the digital paperwork to coincide exactly with the start time of his Monday morning review. His corporate career at OmniHealth was officially dead. The execution was merely waiting for the clock to strike 9. The heavy glass door of my office clicked open. The secure courier Marcus had dispatched stepped into the room, carrying a thick manila envelope. I signed the electronic receipt and took possession of the physical documents. I carried the envelope to my desk and broke the seal. The legal demands were printed on premium, heavy-stock cotton paper. The text was dense, uncompromising, and stripped of any familial warmth. It outlined the exact statutes Victoria had violated. It detailed the financial restitution required to halt criminal prosecution. It was the absolute antithesis of my mother's demand to keep things pleasant. I opened the top drawer of my desk and retrieved a heavy brass fountain pen. The writing instrument was a gift from a previous tech mentor, a pioneering female engineer who had survived the ruthless early days of Silicon Valley. When she handed me the pen years ago, she offered a piece of advice that permanently altered my professional trajectory. She told me that handshakes are tools for politicians, but ink is the weapon of an architect. Always document your leverage. I unscrewed the brass cap. The weight of the pen felt substantial and grounding in my hand. I aligned the signature pages of the legal demands. I pressed the nib to the thick cotton paper. The sharp, rhythmic scratch of the metal tracing my authentic, perfectly vertical signature was the only sound echoing through the expansive glass-walled office. I signed the cease and desist. I signed the repayment demand. I signed the authorization for future criminal prosecution. Every stroke of the pen severed another invisible string my family had used to control me. I was no longer the quiet, compliant bank account they could drain at their convenience. I was the architect of their impending ruin. I gathered the signed pages and slid them into rigid, tamper-evident shipping envelopes. I utilized my corporate logistics terminal to schedule the specialized delivery. Regular mail was insufficient for this operation. Regular mail could be hidden, ignored, or accidentally discarded by a mother desperate to maintain an illusion. I arranged for a bonded process server and certified delivery. The envelopes required a direct physical signature from the recipient. It stripped away any possibility of deniability. I selected the delivery date with calculated malice. The massive high society engagement dinner hosted by my parents was scheduled for this coming Friday evening. The entire suburban elite, alongside Liam's wealthy Boston relatives and several OmniHealth executives, would gather at my parents' house to celebrate the union. It was designed to be Victoria's ultimate triumph. I scheduled the certified legal demands to arrive at the house on Friday afternoon, mere hours before the first guests were expected to walk through the door. The methodical preparation phase was officially resolved. The personal felony and the corporate termination were now intertwined, moving forward on an unstoppable timeline. I sat in the silent office looking out over the sprawling city. The fictional battleground my family had dominated for decades was crumbling. The new conflict was no longer a question of if I would fight back, but rather how catastrophic the explosion would be when the factual legal reality violently collided with their curated fantasy. The countdown to Friday had begun, ensuring maximum unavoidable destruction. The evening arrived with the heavy, frantic energy of a theatrical premiere. My downtown loft had been completely transformed into an unrecognizable landscape. The minimalist aesthetic I usually maintained was buried under towering floral arrangements of white orchids and rented high-top tables draped in heavy satin. A string quartet played near the expansive glass windows overlooking the river. Their classical notes fought a losing battle against the rising hum of high society networking. Catering staff moved like shadows across the hardwood floors, carrying silver trays of delicate appetizers. I had hired them myself on Wednesday morning. I refused to play the role of the subservient kitchen ghost while my sister celebrated her stolen wealth. The scent of roasted garlic and expensive champagne saturated the conditioned air, masking the toxic reality of the gathering. The room was packed with the suburban elite of Edina, the wealthy Boston relatives the groom had imported, and a surprising number of senior leadership personnel from his workplace. He had cast a wide net for this event. He clearly intended to leverage the engagement party as a corporate networking opportunity. He wanted to ensure his future superiors saw him mingling with old money and established families. He was dressed in a sharp tuxedo, holding a rocks glass filled with amber liquid, projecting the image of a man destined for the boardroom. I stood near the edge of the marble kitchen island. I wore a simple, dark sheath dress that drew no attention. Before I could reach for a glass of water, my mother materialized from the dense crowd. Susan grabbed my arm. Her manicured nails dug sharply into my bare skin. She physically pulled me toward the narrow hallway leading to the guest bathroom, forcing me away from the glittering center of the celebration. "What are you doing out here?" Susan hissed. Her polite regional veneer cracked under the immense pressure of hosting the wealthy in-laws. "I told you to stay hidden in the back suite until the toasts were over." I looked down at her tight grip. "The caterers needed the kitchen space," I replied evenly. Susan narrowed her eyes, darting her gaze frantically toward a group of men in expensive charcoal suits. "Those are the senior vice presidents of his medical conglomerate," she whispered fiercely. "His entire career depends on tonight. You cannot speak to them. Do not introduce yourself. If anyone asks, tell them you are a friend of the event planner. Do not embarrass us by discussing your employment situation. Stay in the shadows, Adela." I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. The sheer naked panic in her eyes was a fascinating study in delusion. She was desperately guarding a fragile sandcastle while standing directly on the shoreline of an approaching hurricane. She believed she was protecting her golden child, completely unaware that the tide had already shifted. "I will not say a single word about my employment to his bosses," I promised. My voice was perfectly flat, a mirror reflecting nothing. Susan exhaled a shaky breath, adjusted her pearl necklace to hide her collarbone, and rushed back to charm the Boston relatives. I walked back to the perimeter of the living room, picking up a tall glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. I drifted through the crowd until I found myself standing a mere 3 feet behind my sister and her fiancé. Victoria was completely in her element. She wore a breathtaking designer gown made of imported silk. The fabric cascaded to the floor, catching the ambient light. It was a garment undoubtedly purchased using my forged signature and the stolen trust funds. She was adjusting the knot of his silk tie, projecting the flawless image of a devoted, powerful partner. A gray-haired man holding a dry martini walked up to them. I recognized him instantly from my corporate dossiers. He was the vice president of regional operations for the entire medical giant. Victoria turned her dazzling practiced smile on him. "Richard, it is so wonderful to see you," she projected her voice, ensuring the nearby guests could hear every syllable. "Liam was just telling me about the new data integration strategy he is designing for the executive board. He is practically running the artificial intelligence division at this point. The new technology chief is so lucky to have him steering the ship." Liam nodded humbly, taking a slow sip of his scotch. He did not correct her wild exaggeration. He absorbed the stolen valor, agreeing that his leadership was the vital glue holding the sector together. I stood close enough to smell the sharp pine notes of the expensive cologne he wore. I was utterly invisible to them. The tension in the room was agonizingly thick, a physical weight pressing against my ribs. The conflict between their curated perception and the impending reality had stretched to its absolute breaking point. I navigated away from them, gliding silently between the clustered guests. I observed the fragile ecosystem my family had constructed. Everything inside this penthouse was a lie, built on a foundation of theft and unchecked delusion. The catering, the floral arrangements, and the designer dresses were funded by a documented felony. The corporate confidence radiating from the groom-to-be was built on a job title that no longer existed. The termination sequence I had authorized was currently sitting locked inside the human resources mainframe, scheduled to execute automatically on Monday morning. They were clinking glasses and celebrating a future that had already been legally and digitally eradicated. I took a slow sip of my water, feeling the cold carbonation wash over my tongue. I was the architect of their impending ruin, standing quietly in their blind spot. I checked the subtle silver watch on my wrist. It was nearing 8 o'clock. The stage was perfectly set. The audience was comfortably seated. The actors were performing their lines flawlessly. But they had forgotten to secure the perimeter of their fictional world. A sudden, subtle shift rippled through the crowd near the front entryway. The low murmur of networking conversations dropped a fraction of a decibel. The shift in atmospheric pressure was palpable. I turned my head toward the heavy oak door. A tall woman with striking silver hair stepped into the foyer. She wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit that radiated authentic, unshakable authority. It was Diana Caldwell. She was the chief executive officer of the medical conglomerate. She was not just my direct boss. She was the mentor who had personally recruited me for the technology leadership role. Diana handed her cashmere coat to the bewildered valet. Her presence acted like a magnet, pulling the attention of every corporate climber in the room. Her sharp eyes scanned the crowded space, entirely ignoring the mid-level managers who were suddenly scrambling to straighten their postures and hide their alcoholic drinks. She was a true apex predator entering an ecosystem of scavengers. She was looking for one specific person. The carefully constructed containment walls my family had built were about to shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The arrival of Diana Caldwell sent a visible ripple through the high society crowd. Guests parted intuitively, granting the chief executive a wide berth as she surveyed the rented satin tables and towering orchids. She moved with the fluid grace of a woman who owned the airspace she occupied. Liam remained entirely oblivious to the apex predator navigating the room. He stood near the carved ice sculpture, flanked by 2 junior executives from his division and the regional vice president he had been desperately courting. Emboldened by his own perceived importance and the generous pours of expensive scotch, Liam decided to consolidate his image as the benevolent, powerful patriarch of his impending marriage. He caught sight of me standing quietly by the marble island and saw an opportunity to perform. He navigated toward me, his entourage trailing close behind. Victoria noticed the movement and quickly stepped up to his side, linking her arm through his. Susan hovered a few feet away, her hands clutching a linen napkin, her eyes wide with a sudden sharp warning. She had explicitly forbidden me from speaking to his corporate bosses. "Adela," Liam called out. His voice was deliberately loud, designed to project across the immediate vicinity and capture the attention of the regional vice president. "I am glad I caught you. We were just discussing the current job market." I placed my glass of sparkling water on the marble counter. The condensation pooled silently against the stone. I turned to face him, keeping my posture relaxed and my expression entirely blank. "Yes, Liam." He offered a patronizing, pitying smile. It was the exact expression a wealthy benefactor might use when addressing a charity case. "Victoria tells me you are still struggling to find your footing. I know it can be discouraging when you lack a clear career trajectory, but I want to help. Family takes care of family, right?" Victoria beamed at him, her eyes shining with manufactured gratitude. "He is so generous," she murmured to the junior executives who nodded in unison. Liam adjusted his silk tie, squaring his shoulders to ensure his superiors observed his magnanimity. OmniHealth is expanding rapidly. We always need administrative support. I was speaking with Human Resources yesterday, and I think I could secure an interview for you. It would be a low-level data entry position, perhaps in the mailroom or answering phones for the IT help desk. But it is a steady paycheck. It would give you a chance to build a real resume. I looked at the men standing behind him. The vice president offered a polite, detached nod, clearly unimpressed by the family drama, but willing to humor his ambitious subordinate. Susan had gone perfectly rigid, her knuckles turning white around the linen napkin. She wanted to intervene, to drag me back to the bedroom, but causing a scene in front of the executives would violate her cardinal rule of keeping things pleasant. "That is a very specific offer, Liam," I said quietly. My voice barely carried over the string quartet playing in the background. "It requires a strong work ethic," Liam cautioned, leaning forward to deliver his career advice. "Corporate environments are demanding. You cannot just wear sweatpants and hide in your apartment. You have to show up. You have to prove your worth every single day. But I am willing to put my own reputation on the line to vouch for you." He reached into his tailored tuxedo pocket and retrieved his smartphone. The screen illuminated his face with a soft glow. "Let us connect professionally right now. I will send your profile to the hiring managers before I go into my performance review on Monday. It shows initiative. Remind me, what is your full legal name?" The trap had opened its jaws. The bait was taken. I did not need to push him. He was eagerly jumping into the abyss, demanding an audience to witness his descent. "Adela Stephen," I replied. I pronounced each syllable with distinct crystalline clarity. Liam tapped the glass screen, his thumbs moving swiftly across the digital keyboard. "Adela," he muttered under his breath, spelling the letters as he searched the professional networking platform. "And Stephen, got it." I stood perfectly still. I watched his eyes track the search results. The transition took less than 3 seconds. The polite, condescending smile that had defined his entire persona did not merely fade, it shattered. The structural integrity of his face collapsed. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving a sickly, chalky pallor. His jaw went slack. The blue light from the digital display illuminated the sheer, unadulterated terror expanding in his widened eyes. He stopped breathing. The air caught in his throat, producing a sharp, strangled clicking sound. He stared at the screen, reading the verified corporate profile, the employment history, and the executive title sitting directly beneath the name of the woman he had just offered a mailroom job. He slowly raised his head, his gaze locked onto mine. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the profound, paralyzing realization that he was staring at his own executioner. Before his paralyzed vocal cords could form a single word, the crowd behind him parted like the Red Sea. Diana Caldwell stepped into the clearing. She bypassed the regional vice president without a glance and walked directly toward me. Adela Diana greeted. Her voice resonated with genuine warmth and undeniable authority. It sliced through the suffocating tension of the room like a scalpel. I smiled, a genuine expression reaching my eyes for the first time that evening. "Good evening, Diana. I am glad you could make it." Diana embraced me briefly, a gesture of professional equality that sent shockwaves through the observing executives. "I would not miss it," the chief executive said, turning to survey the stunned group. "I needed to celebrate my legendary technology chief. The board is still analyzing the restructuring protocols you drafted on Thursday. Your zero-tolerance audit for the legacy data sectors is brilliant. It is exactly the kind of ruthless efficiency OmniHealth required." The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. The regional vice president dropped his martini glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor, a sharp, resonant crash that echoed the destruction of my family's curated illusion. Legendary technology chief. The Minnesota nice facade evaporated instantly. The quiet, jobless sister, the family embarrassment, the woman ordered to hide in the back bedroom, was publicly identified as the apex predator of the entire medical conglomerate. I looked past Liam to observe my blood relatives. Victoria stood frozen, her manicured hand still resting on Liam's arm. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes darting between me and the chief executive. Her brain desperately tried to process the impossible data. The sister she had mocked, the woman whose identity she had stolen to fund this very party, was the omnipotent force her fiancé had been terrified of for weeks. Susan looked as if she had been struck by lightning. The linen napkin slipped from her grasp, falling silently to the floor. The social hierarchy she worshipped had just inverted itself with bone-crushing force. She realized the suburban elite, the wealthy Boston in-laws, and the top-tier corporate leadership were all watching the unemployed disappointment command the absolute respect of a billionaire chief executive. Liam finally managed to draw a ragged breath. He looked down at his phone, then back up to my face. His hands shook so severely the device nearly slipped from his fingers. "You," Liam choked out. The sound was pitiful, stripped of all dignity. "You are the CTO." I held his gaze. I let the silence stretch, allowing the devastating reality to settle into his bones. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to shout. The factual truth was loud enough to tear the house down. "Yes, Liam," I said evenly. "And as I recall, we have a performance review scheduled for Monday morning at 9. I suggest you enjoy the rest of your evening. It is going to be a very long weekend for you." The public execution was flawless, but the corporate humiliation was only the first phase of the reckoning. The engagement party had descended into a silent, horrified paralysis. Yet the true devastation was still waiting in the wings. While my sister and my mother stared at me in paralyzing shock, I knew the bonded process server carrying the certified evidence of Victoria's felony was currently pulling up to the valet station outside. The social illusion had burned to the ground. The legal nightmare was about to begin. The sound of the shattered martini glass lingered in the expansive loft. The sharp crash had severed the invisible strings controlling the room. No one moved to clean up the spilled liquor or gather the broken crystals scattered across the polished hardwood floor. The OmniHealth executives formed a wide, silent circle around us. The high society guests stopped networking. The string quartet lowered their instruments. Every eye in the penthouse was fixed on the terrified data integration manager and the woman he had just offered a mailroom position. Liam swallowed hard. His vocal cords appeared to malfunction. He opened his mouth, but only a dry rasp emerged. He tried again, his chest heaving as his brain struggled to process the catastrophic error. "Adela," Liam stammered. His voice cracked on the second syllable. "I had no idea. Why did you not say anything? I was just trying to be helpful. I thought you were struggling." The confident corporate climber had vanished. He regressed into a terrified subordinate pleading for his professional life. His tailored tuxedo suddenly looked like a borrowed costume. Victoria stepped forward, her survival instincts engaged, driving her to salvage the burning wreckage of her social triumph. She let out a high-pitched, artificial laugh that echoed painfully in the silent room. "Oh my goodness," Victoria practically trilled, grabbing Liam by the bicep. "Adela, you really kept this charade going for a long time." "It is a running family inside joke, Diana. My sister is always playing these understated pranks. We love keeping Liam on his toes. It is just our sense of humor." Victoria looked around at the executives, flashing her brilliant pageant-trained smile. She expected the wealthy crowd to smooth over the awkwardness. She relied on the assumption that polite society would always choose comfort over confrontation. Diana Caldwell did not smile. The chief executive looked at Victoria as if studying a fascinating, somewhat pitiful insect. A prank Diana repeated. Her tone was glacial, carrying the undeniable weight of American corporate hierarchy. An executive-level restructuring protocol is not a prank. Your sister has been executing pivotal acquisitions for this medical conglomerate for 6 months. She is the foremost authority on artificial intelligence integration in the hemisphere. She does not play practical jokes. Victoria felt the air leave her lungs. Her fake laughter died instantly. The corporate reality crushed her fictional narrative into dust. The executives in the room instinctively took a collective step backward. They were physically distancing themselves from the blast radius. Liam was now deemed toxic. By extension, the woman holding his arm was also toxic. Susan could not endure the public humiliation. Her entire curated ecosystem was collapsing before her eyes. The Boston in-laws were watching her family disintegrate. When psychological manipulation failed, Susan always reverted to physical control. She stepped toward me, her eyes wide with desperate urgency. She reached out her hand, aiming to grasp my forearm. It was the same gesture she used to steer me into the shadows. It was the same physical cue that dictated I needed to comply, lower my voice, and accept my designated role as the family embarrassment. Her manicured fingers brushed the fabric of my dark dress. I did not yell. I did not flinch away. I turned my head slowly and looked down at her hand resting on my arm. I said nothing. I simply stared at her fingers, maintaining an expression of cold, clinical observation. The silence stretched. It was heavy and suffocating. The regional vice president watched the interaction. Diana Caldwell watched. The wealthy patriarch from Boston watched. Susan felt the collective, unspoken judgment of the room pressing down on her shoulders. She realized, perhaps for the very first time, that she possessed zero leverage. The daughter she had treated as a disposable liability was the most powerful entity in the building. Susan slowly, humiliatingly pulled her hand away. She let her arm fall to her side, her posture slumping in profound defeat. She retreated a step, fading into the background, where she belonged. I returned my attention to Liam. He was visibly trembling. Sweat beaded on his forehead, catching the light from the chandeliers. Ms. Stephen Liam began adopting formal titles in a desperate bid for salvation. I sincerely apologize for my previous remarks. I was out of line. I was misinformed about your status. I deeply respect your leadership and the new direction of the company. I look forward to proving my value to the data integration team. I promise you will see a renewed dedication from my sector. I utilized my corporate voice. It is a specific register, devoid of sentimentality, operating entirely on objective facts. Apologies are unnecessary, Liam, I said evenly. Professional evaluations are not based on personal interactions at social gatherings. They are based on metrics and output. Your current division is operating at a severe deficit. It lacks the efficiency required for our upcoming initiatives. We will discuss your department redundancies during your scheduled review on Monday morning. The word redundancies echoed in the quiet space. It is the sterile corporate euphemism for termination. Liam understood the translation instantly. His knees buckled slightly. He reached out to grip the edge of the marble kitchen island to keep himself upright. The public confrontation was resolved. My antagonists were stripped of their armor. The polite Minnesota nice facade lay in ashes on my hardwood floor. The fictional battle was won, replaced by undeniable factual supremacy. Liam turned his head to look at his own parents. His father, the man with the tweed jacket and old money arrogance, stared back with undisguised disgust. The wealthy patriarch recognized a career-ending blunder. He turned to his wife, whispering a sharp instruction. They were already calculating the social cost of remaining associated with my disgraced relatives. Victoria tried to grab Liam by the hand again. He pulled away from her grasp. The foundation of their relationship was built on mutual ambition and shared status. With his professional status eradicated, her appeal vanished. She was no longer an asset. She was the sister of the executive who had just destroyed his life. Diana Caldwell turned to me. I believe I have disrupted your family gathering enough for one evening, the chief executive said softly, though the ambient acoustics carried her voice clearly. I look forward to finalizing the audit protocols on Monday, Adela. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, Diana, I replied. She departed with the same fluid grace she had entered with. The other executives quickly followed her lead. They murmured polite, hasty excuses, abandoning their half-empty drinks on the satin tables. Nobody wanted to remain in the presence of a doomed manager. The mass exodus was a brutal demonstration of corporate self-preservation. The Boston relatives followed closely behind the executives, offering curt nods instead of warm farewells. Susan watched the wealthy guests fleeing toward the elevator bank. Her flawless engagement dinner was disintegrating. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with a mixture of terror and sudden raw hatred. "How could you?" Susan whispered. Her voice trembled. "How could you do this to your sister?" "I did nothing," I answered, keeping my tone level. "I simply introduced myself. The rest was your own creation." The penthouse was nearly empty now, save for my immediate relatives Liam and the silent catering staff frozen in the kitchen. The string quartet had already packed their instruments into velvet-lined cases and slipped out the service door. Victoria twisted her face into a mask of pure fury. The silk designer gown suddenly looked ridiculous, a lavish costume for a play that had just been cancelled. "You ruined everything," Victoria snarled, taking a step toward me. "You set him up. You knew he was trying to get a promotion, and you humiliated him on purpose. You are sick. You are a jealous, spiteful person." "I evaluated an inefficient employee," I corrected her. "His behavior tonight merely confirmed the data. His termination is a corporate necessity. Your social life is collateral damage." Liam let out a hollow, broken sound. He did not defend Victoria. He did not defend himself. He stared at the floor, contemplating the ruins of his future. I stood in my hijacked sanctuary, the undisputed victor of the social war. The emotional manipulation that had governed my existence for 28 years held no power here. But the evening was not finished. The corporate execution had severed their future income, but the past crimes still required a reckoning. The heavy oak front door of my penthouse opened. The concierge from the lobby desk stepped into the foyer. He looked uncomfortable, glancing at the tense remnants of the party. "Excuse me, Miss Stephen," the concierge said, addressing me directly. "There is a bonded courier downstairs. He insists on delivering a certified package personally. He says it requires a physical signature from a Victoria Stephen. He refused to leave it at the security desk." Victoria snapped her head toward the doorway. "A package for me?" she asked, her voice tight with confusion. "Who sends a certified package at 8 o'clock on a Friday night?" I looked at my sister. Her eyes were wide, darting from the concierge back to me. The ultimate domestic reckoning had arrived. The financial crimes she thought were safely buried under a decorative placemat were currently riding the elevator up to my floor. "You should probably sign for that, Victoria," I suggested quietly. "It sounds important." Victoria stared at the concierge, standing in the doorway of my loft. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of confusion and mounting panic. The evening had already systematically dismantled her engagement and her social standing. She looked at the thick cardboard envelope in the concierge's hands, then back at me. Her survival instincts, honed by years of avoiding accountability, kicked into overdrive. "I am not signing for anything tonight," Victoria snapped. Her voice was shrill, echoing in the ruined atmosphere of the party. She grabbed her designer clutch from the marble island. "We are leaving, Mom, now." Susan did not argue. She gathered her coat, keeping her eyes averted from mine. Liam followed them, a silent, defeated shadow. They brushed past the concierge, refusing the delivery, and fled toward the elevator bank. The concierge looked at me, holding the digital signature pad. "They refuse the package, Ms. Stephen." I nodded slowly. "That is fine. The courier service has her permanent legal address on file. They will attempt redelivery tomorrow morning." The heavy oak door closed, sealing my loft in profound, absolute silence. The next morning, the crisp Saturday sunlight illuminated the sterile geometry of my home office. At precisely 9 o'clock, I received a secure digital notification from the bonded courier service. The certified legal letters regarding the forged commercial loan had been successfully delivered and signed for at Susan's suburban house in Edina. The physical evidence had finally breached their last safe haven. I did not wait for the inevitable fallout. I woke my dual monitors and initiated the final phase of the extraction. I logged into the master administrative portal for the family trust. I navigated to the beneficiary access controls. With a series of deliberate, unhesitating keystrokes, I permanently revoked all secondary financial access. I deleted Victoria's routing numbers. I froze Susan's quarterly dividend disbursements, logging a formal administrative hold due to documented fraudulent activity. The silent bank closed its vault forever. The endless pipeline of unearned capital that had funded their curated lifestyle, their designer wardrobes, and their country club aesthetics was severed. I refused to absorb the debt. I refused to subsidize my own erasure for another single second. They were left to face the financial ruin they had orchestrated entirely on their own. My mobile phone vibrated against the polished wood of my desk. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. I watched the screen glow, the device rattling softly until the call rolled over to voicemail. A minute later, the audio file appeared in my inbox. I pressed play. The acoustics of Susan's kitchen hummed in the background. Then came the sound of weeping. It was not the careful, composed crying she utilized to garner sympathy from her peers. It was the raw, breathless sound of structural collapse. "Adela, please," Susan begged through the speaker. Her voice was thick and frantic. The administrative brightness was gone, replaced by unfiltered terror. "We received the letters. Victoria is inconsolable. You cannot do this to your sister. The lawyers are threatening criminal charges. Liam will not answer his phone, and his parents changed their flights back to Boston. The engagement is ruined. We cannot afford to pay back this bank loan. Please, honey, you have the money. Just fix this. We are a family. We have to keep it pleasant." I listened to the entire recording. I analyzed the cadence of her panic. There was no apology for the theft. There was no remorse for the years of emotional suppression. She was only grieving the loss of her leverage. She still expected me to purchase her peace. I tapped the screen and deleted the voicemail. The audio file vanished into the digital void. The internal reckoning was resolved. Monday morning arrived with the clinical, uncompromising logic of the corporate sector. I sat in my executive suite at OmniHealth, reviewing the automated personnel algorithms. Downstairs in the Human Resources Department, Liam walked into his scheduled performance review. He entered the room expecting a lucrative promotion and a director title. Instead, the Human Resources representative handed him the output of my efficiency audit. The system had flagged his entire data integration division as structurally obsolete. Liam was formally stripped of his management credentials. His access to the executive corporate network was revoked. Because of his brief tenure, the company offered him a stark choice. He could accept a nominal severance package and exit the building, or he could accept a severe demotion to a baseline entry-level data processing role. Liam carried a massive mortgage on a suburban house and a lease on a luxury vehicle he could no longer afford. He required a steady paycheck to survive. He swallowed his pride and accepted the demotion. The arrogant corporate climber was systematically reduced to the exact low-level data entry position he had so generously offered me at the dinner table. Victoria faced a much harsher reality. Without Liam's projected executive income, she possessed no avenues to secure a secondary loan to repay the trust. She was forced to retain a criminal defense attorney to address the cease and desist order and the impending wire fraud charges. The legal retainer consumed every remaining dollar in her checking account. She began selling her designer blazers and imported silk gowns online just to cover her legal consultations. Her lifestyle brand collapsed overnight as her followers noticed the sudden cessation of her luxury content. The fictional empire burned to ash. The following Friday evening, the security intercom in my loft buzzed. Aunt Valerie bypassed the lobby desk and rode the elevator to my penthouse. She stepped through the front door wearing a sharp navy suit, carrying a sleek black gift bag. Valerie walked directly to the kitchen island and pulled a bottle of vintage top-tier champagne from the bag. The dark glass was cold to the touch. She peeled the gold foil and popped the cork with a sharp, festive snap. She poured the pale, bubbling liquid into 2 crystal flutes. She handed one to me, and we walked out onto the expansive glass balcony. The cold Minnesota wind moved around us, but the chill did not reach my bones. We stood side by side looking out over the sprawling Twin Cities. The headquarters of medical giants and corporate empires glittered against the twilight sky. Valerie raised her flute. The crystal caught the ambient city light. "To the end of the Minnesota Nice era," she said smoothly, "and to the profound, untouchable peace of an accurately balanced ledger." I tapped my glass against hers. The ringing sound was clear and decisive. To the ledger, I agreed. We drank the champagne in companionable silence. Valerie did not inquire about my mother or my sister. She understood that those accounts were permanently closed and written off as bad debt. She simply stood beside me on the balcony, acknowledging the architect who had successfully reclaimed her territory. I am 28 years old. When strangers ask me what I do for a living now, I do not lower my gaze or offer vague apologies. I look them in the eye and tell them exactly who I am. I am the Chief Technology Officer of a global conglomerate. I built my empire in the quiet hours, while other people were busy curating their illusions. If I have learned anything from the wreckage of my family, it is this. You can spend your entire life sanding your edges down to fit into someone else's comfortable narrative, or you can stand up, sign your authentic name, and let your work do the talking. Quiet competence will always outlast loud, desperate fiction. If you have ever been the invisible pillar holding up a family that refused to acknowledge your strength, share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you believe that true peace never requires you to hide your identity, subscribe to Morning Revenge. There is a new story every week about quiet women stepping into the light, and the next one might sound exactly like yours. The American suburban dining table is often treated as a sacred altar. It is the gathering place where the mythology of the family is polished, served, and consumed. But what happens when the sacrifices made upon that altar are the identities and the dignity of our own children? We have just witnessed a narrative where a mother prioritized the aesthetic of a successful, high society engagement over the fundamental truth of her daughter's existence. This story is not merely a tale of corporate revenge or financial restitution. It is a profound mirror reflecting the deepest, most uncomfortable realities of modern parenting. Familial responsibility, and the spiritual decay lurking beneath the surface of our culture. To parents across America, especially those holding tight to the rigid structures of traditional family values, this narrative serves as a chilling audit of our priorities. We are often conditioned by societal expectations to believe that a quiet house is a healthy house. We weaponize regional concepts like Midwestern politeness or Southern hospitality to sweep necessary conflict under the rug, demanding that our children keep things pleasant at all costs. But peace that must be purchased with the silence and suppression of one child to elevate another is not peace at all. It is a debt, and emotional debts accrue terrible interest. Raising children requires profound emotional awareness, an attribute that cannot be faked with designer clothing or country club memberships. When parents play the dangerous game of favoritism, when they groom one child to be the golden trophy and relegate the other to be the silent bank, they fail in their most fundamental duty. They teach the favored child that deception, entitlement, and superficiality are acceptable tools for survival. Simultaneously, they teach the quiet child that their worth is strictly conditional, tied only to their utility and their willingness to shrink into the shadows. True traditional family values are rooted in fairness, accountability, and the courage to see your children for who they actually are, rather than the curated image you wish for them to project to the neighbors. For the younger generation navigating these toxic familial ecosystems, the protagonist's journey offers a vital, unyielding message. For years, you might convince yourself that swallowing your pride and hiding your success is a noble sacrifice. You might mistakenly label your self-erasure as humility, believing that absorbing the insults will eventually earn you a seat at the table. But invisibility is not a virtue. It is a vacancy. If you do not claim your own narrative, people who are terrified of your potential will gladly furnish that vacancy with their own lies. Your competence is your armor. Your name is your territory. Stop funding your own erasure. Step into the light, sign your authentic name to your work, and let your undeniable reality silence the room. You do not owe your quiet compliance to a family that demands your diminishment. If we elevate our perspective and view this societal reality through the lens of a spiritual practitioner, one dedicated to the path of deep self-cultivation, the diagnosis of modern culture becomes even more stark. American society has become deeply infatuated with external validation. We chase corporate titles, luxury aesthetics, and curated social media feeds, falsely believing these brittle metrics represent a successful, meaningful life. This external obsession traps us in a cycle of profound spiritual poverty, where people will commit quiet atrocities against their own blood just to maintain a fictional public image. The chaotic modern world pushes us outward, urging us to control the perceptions of others while our internal landscapes wither. The antidote to this cultural sickness is a rigorous, unyielding return to self-cultivation. True wisdom is the ability to pierce through the noise of societal expectations and evaluate the ledger of your life clearly. It is recognizing that the applause of an executive boardroom or the validation of a wealthy in-law means nothing if the foundation of your character is rotting. Morality is not the act of keeping things pleasant or avoiding uncomfortable truths. True morality is the courage to stand in the harsh light of reality, acting with justice and integrity even when it costs you your social standing. Furthermore, this path requires immense resilience, a deep spiritual fortitude. Resilience is the grit required to look at the people you love and refuse to participate in their delusions. It is the strength to hold your ground and establish boundaries, understanding that true compassion sometimes requires allowing others to face the consequences of their actions. The family unit is meant to be the first and most critical training ground for the soul. It is where we learn the parameters of unconditional love and ethical behavior. When we focus on cultivating our own inner wisdom, morality, and resilience, we stop relying on the external world to dictate our worth. A life built on the solid bedrock of truth requires far less maintenance than an existence built on a fragile scaffolding of lies. If you have ever felt the suffocating weight of an imbalanced family ledger, or if you are ready to stop paying for a peace you are never allowed to enjoy, you are not alone. Subscribe to Morning Revenge. Join a community where we dismantle the fictions that hold us back and celebrate the quiet strength that eventually brings the truth to the surface. Share your journey in the comments below, because every story we tell helps dismantle a lie that someone else is currently suffering under. Conventional wisdom insists that forgiveness is the ultimate virtue, that blood is an unbreakable bond, and that holding a family together is always the highest moral imperative. We are taught to weather the storm, turn the other cheek, and keep the table set for those who continually disrespect us. But this is a comforting fiction, designed to keep the powerful comfortable and the victims compliant. The deepest spiritual truth is that loyalty to a toxic system is merely self-sabotage disguised as nobility. Sometimes the most profound act of love you can offer your family is not to enable them with your forgiveness, but to step aside and let their carefully constructed world collapse under the weight of its own deceit. True peace is never found by sitting quietly at a poisoned table. It is found the exact moment you realize you own the power to walk away and build your own.